Hello, everybody. This is an unusual episode of the Artisans of Steel. We were supposed to have guest Greg Sims, very talented maker, buddy of mine, kind of, in my eyes, master of sand mine hormones. And unfortunately, he can't be here today. He got super sick, and so we're hoping to catch him next time around when he's feeling better. So today I'm going to be doing a conversation, or I guess a self interview, or kind of telling my own story, because I realized after doing this podcast for almost 2 years now, I actually haven't really told my story. So this is an opportunity for me to do that. So, but before we get into things, I want to just give a shout out to my super sponsors for this month. The first super sponsor is Mr. Russell Tinsley. He's Oozlefinch Beers. That's OOZLFINCH Beers on Instagram, as well as Can't Make Knives. And I'm really excited for him. He's got a collab coming up with his buddy Sands on the Rocks. They were doing some Damascus making and or I don't know about Damascus making, but knife making, as well as some beer and knife collaboration action. So it's really cool to see that. Go give him a follow. He's a really great guy. Next up is my buddy Dan Hubbs. He was a student of mine recently. I guess not super recently, but last September. And he took my Damascus theory class, and he is seriously putting all of that knowledge to work now. He's doing an awesome job. So I just want to give Dan a shout out for the awesome, really great work he's doing. And if you go follow him on Instagram at 66, those are the numbers, 66 Mountain Knives, you can see his work, especially the stuff he's doing recently. I mean, he always does really nice, clean work, but the patterns he's putting out lately are really cool and exciting. And I'm psyched to see what he's been doing. Next up, we have Mr. Lawrence Lake over at Maritime Knife Supply. Real quick, Mike Poor in the house, shout out. He's here in the live chat. Thank you, Mike. How you doing this morning? Mr. Lawrence Lake over at Maritime Knife Supply. He is at Maritime Knife Supply on all the socials, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. You can also find them for all your knife making needs over at maritimenifesupply.com. He just got in some, I think it was 3/4 inch octagon stock, 1080 octagon stock, and a bunch of Rhino Stick, which is a great sandpaper. I've only used it a couple times before, but I really love how it's just handy it is to just slap it right on to your material, whatever you're using, to your hand sanding stick, actually, really, for cleaning up your blades, getting them finished out. So go check out Lawrence's wares over at Maritime Knife Supply on Instagram. Next up, we have Gabe Fletcher of Anchorage Brewing. He is another brewer, very talented brewer. I've been fortunate to work with him, and he has some really cool collaboration beers that he's got coming out. Well, as we're recording right now, the people who are seeing this live as it's being recording, you can I think you can still go over to the Tavour app. That's TAVOUR. It is a kind of like a beer marketplace app, and you can get or pre-order the Schwarzer beer. You can pre-order the Schwarzer beer. It is a collaboration between Gabe and Steve Schwarzer, legend in the knife making industry, and from all I can see, the feedback I've been getting from Gabe especially is a very tasty beer. So go check him out. He's also doing really great knife work. He's really come a long way in, I don't even know if it's been 2 years yet that he's been making knives, and he's doing some really awesome stuff. He just actually did a his take on Ben Kamon's monolith style integral tang, skeletonized tang knife. I don't know what you want to call it. Anyways, Ben Kamon's monolith knife. And so if you go follow him on Anchorage Forge, you'll be able to see that work. Anchorage Brewing is where you can find his beers. And so go check him out, give him a follow. Next up, we have Eric Kidwell. He is at District 202 LLC, and I'm going to be seeing Eric very soon, and actually, well, in a month. I'm going to be down in Arizona at the Travis Worts Hammer-In. I'm going to be doing some demonstrations down there, and I'm excited to see Eric and catch up with him. It's been a while since, gosh, it's probably been like 4 years, maybe 5 years since I saw him last. So it'll be good to catch up with him. He is the point man at that Hammer-In. He is making it happen so everybody can get the most out of the experience, especially when it comes to the grinding and some of the forging action, because there's only so much space for standing around a grinder or standing around an anvil and watching people work. And so he's in there in the mix, capturing and getting footage of everything, and that's getting projected or sent to a separate screen where everybody can see what's going on. And if you haven't signed up yet, I believe anybody, it would be very last second for anybody hearing this as it's coming out to the public, but anybody who's catching this live in the Patreon, you can get tickets, I believe, still to the Travis Worts Hammer-In. And I'm also going to be teaching a Damascus theory class at this, the Desert Metal Crafts school down in Tucson right after the Hammer-In. So I do the Hammer-In, and then boom, next day I'm going to be teaching a class at the Desert Metal Craft School, where owned by and operated by my buddy Rich Greenwood, and that'll be a good time. And then I'm going to be hanging out with my buddy Don Wynn in Tucson and doing some collaboration work with him. So if you haven't signed up yet and you're interested in that, that is going to be a perfect double whammy to hit that Hammer-In and then follow the Hammer-In with that class. But spots are limited for the class, so make sure if you're interested, you get info as soon as you possibly can. All right, last but not least is Mr. Josh Weston. Josh A. Weston on Instagram. He's also part of the Dragon Forge experience, and they are all down in Phoenix, Arizona, actually, right now. I wish I was going to get to see him when I'm down there. He's going to be down there for a while, and I'm not going to get to catch him because I'm either going to be in Casa Grande, which is where the Hammer-In's at, which is an hour from Phoenix, or I'm going to be in Tucson, which is 2 hours from Phoenix. So I won't get to see Josh while he's down there. If I had my own vehicle, maybe I would make that happen, but I just can't make it, unfortunately. But you could possibly, if you're down in Phoenix, go check them out. Go check out the Renaissance Festival. They always have a really great time. They have all these really rad fabricated dragons that you can, and they're still going to be going now as this episode comes out live to the public. It's still going on now. Go to the dragons and go and forge and have yourself your own personal dragon forging experience with my buddy Josh. He's a really great guy, and I'm looking forward to seeing him. I probably will be seeing him in June at the Blade Show in Atlanta, where I've been talking to him about doing he does this marathon throughout the 3 days there where he's running around and making a knife. So I think it would be super fun to go and do that with him. So that's it. Go follow Josh. Go follow all the super sponsors. They're all great guys. Yeah, really good follows. And here it is. So again, my friend Greg Sims was supposed to be here with me today, but unfortunately he is terribly sick with I think he said the norovirus. I'm not quite sure what that one is. I haven't been keeping up with all the different viruses and stuff going on. So unfortunately he won't be here with us. It's going to be me doing a solo episode. And again, I haven't, oops, I'm just dropping stuff all over the floor. After doing this podcast for 2 years, I haven't really actually sat down and told my story. I've kind of told my story and talked about how I got into knife making on, on a couple other podcasts, on the Knife Talk podcast when Craig was running that, Craig Lockwood of Chop Knives, when he first started that podcast. And then also with Jeff Fader over at his Full Blast podcast. And so I just want to kind of get into it here and kind of tell my story and who I am, kind of do an introduction to me, because I do all these interviews with all these other great makers, but I haven't really done an introduction to me and who I am. So why not start the year off with that? So my name is Mareko Maumasi. I am the owner and operator of Maumasi Fire Arts, and I specialize in culinary knives and crazy Damascus patterns, and and that's basically it. My big thing in knife making is just trying to try to explore it as a craft, and try to find the limitations, and thankfully there are very few limitations. And so I'm continuing to discover and innovate on processes and techniques and patterns and finishing processes and stuff like that. And I'm excited, and, and I'm stoked to be sharing it with you guys here on the Patreon, who are catching this live, as well as the community at large, because really, I think that's what we're in this life to do. Find something we're great at, share it with the world, inspire others, teach others, and provide value to others through our services, our creations, and our crafts. And so, how did I get started in knife making? Where did it all start? I ever since I was a little kid, and anytime in this conversation where I'm just kind of like blabbing, please, anybody watching the live stream, please feel free to jump in and ask any questions you might have. Um, Ideally, if you do it in the live stream chat, I'll be able to catch it. If it's over on the Patreon, I'll try to keep that up to date, but it's not as likely for me to catch it, but I will definitely check it periodically. Anyways, okay. I was a wild kid. I was very, very busy, always curious, and always getting into trouble, honestly, nonstop. Because, and I think a lot of kids are just super inquisitive, which is cool. This is great. I have a 7-year-old myself, and it is doubly fascinating as well as occasionally frustrating how the mind works, and that curiosity, and that constant questioning. And I think I see a lot of what I used to do in him, and I sometimes struggle to encourage that in him, while trying to stay on task or not to get too frustrated, because I don't want to squelch that in them. But sometimes you just got to get stuff done. So, anyways, I was a curious, creative kid. I love drawing. I love creating. I love building things. And I think early on, I'm trying to think early on, I really loved art, drawing images and music. I'm sorry, I'm just like, for those not watching the video, I'm like closing my eyes and trying to reflect back to my childhood. Yeah, drawing, music, dancing, playing nonstop. I loved books, but I was horrible at reading. I still am undiagnosed, but I'm very confident that I have a form of dyslexia, which periodically manifests still as an adult, when either while I'm trying to read or while I'm trying to talk, I will switch up words, get them backwards, as well as do it while I'm reading. But anyways, which made it challenging through school, and always being interested in drawing always kept me somewhat preoccupied or distracted from doing my actual schoolwork. I always struggled through school, and I think I was definitely one of those square pegs trying to get squeezed into a round hole. And so I, all through childhood, I really struggled with school. But I constantly thrived in any kind of movement, athletics, games and sports, music, and art. And that was my thing. And I'm trying to think of times when it really manifested. I think when I was young, I used to my stepdad, who's no longer part of my family, but my stepdad at the time worked in a carpentry shop, and he would bring home chunks of wood, and I think it was actually meant for the fireplace, because growing up, we did not have a lot of extra money around. We basically had enough to keep a roof over our head, and food in our belly most of the time. And so we also didn't really have a lot of I guess excess or not definitely no extravagant things. And so we spent a lot of time playing with things like these scrap pieces of wood. And because he was a carpenter, he had hammer and he had nails, and I learned how to use a hammer and driving nails, and I would build things with these blocks of woods, and they were like 2x4 and 2x8 and 2x6 cutoffs, 2x10 cutoffs, usually pretty short. And so I would build like these little like boxes, security boxes, and I would like build them so they had pivoting doors and you could put things inside them. And I was really obsessed with like building these secret boxes that you could put things in or hide things in. But realistically, like in my head, I was like, oh, this is so great. But realistically, this giant chunk of wood floating around the room, what is that doing there? Of course, there's something hidden in it. And I would try to like put candy or whatever, my Halloween candy, whatnot. But that was when I first started messing with that kind of with building things and like in a more elaborate way. I remember in what was it? I think it was third grade. I was halfway through the year. I was actually transferring schools just after this happened, but it was when I first realized that I was actually really I wasn't just good at drawing, but it was like different. And that I stood out in a way as an artist and or as a drawer or illustrator. And we were doing this Egyptian segment in our third grade class, learning about Egypt and Egyptian stuff. And we were doing these, oh gosh, what were they called? But where you take a small image and you make it bigger. Or an enlargement. We were enlarging and we were using the grid process. Well, basically, you take an image. What we were taking were like photocopies out of a book, and I was doing, I believe it was Osiris, which was the owl-headed god, Egyptian god of like wisdom. He said he had something to do with death too. I can't remember now. I'm sure we'll learn about it more when my kid's going through that time. But anyways, and I was drawing or had the whole grid laid out, and teacher told us what we were supposed to do. Just draw what's in each individual square. And so we laid out a graph on a larger piece of paper and made a corresponding grid. And then I was drawing the different things, and I drew it like perfectly, at least as perfect as as a third grader can. But everybody was absolutely astonished, and that was the first time I was like, oh, I think this is a thing that I'm good at. Before that I was just doodle and whatever, kind of mess around with drawing, but I never really got too crazy about it. And so I took that from there, and then we would do more art projects. And so over the years, I became one of the art kids, one of the creative kids. And I was also very good at sports. I was killed at kickball and all kinds of stuff. And when I get into middle school, I did more competitive athletics in playing football and track and field. The whole time still being an artsy fartsy kind of kid, but also really, really struggling at school. I loved learning. I really struggled, especially with like any kind of in-class reading projects or reading assignments, in-class reading assignments, or any kind of book reading. Like I could not get it to stick. When I was reading, I was either so distracted or over, like inside my head I had like so many thoughts going on. I would be reading a page, I would be saying all the words to myself, but nothing was getting in. And I'd get to the end of a page and I'd realize I have no idea what it said, because at the same time as reading, I have other thoughts going through my head, or I have other insecurities about, everybody else is flipping through the pages super fast. And I'm just like, it's taking me 10 minutes to read one page. And yeah, so I really struggled until I graduated high school, really, with school. And so I really leaned into art and my athletic abilities, as well as my creative and artistic abilities, because that was the place where I could get praise, really. I was not getting praise for my reading, writing, and arithmetic. That is for sure. Um, and so I really leaned into art, athletics, and I just kept that going. And it was in middle school where I started. We still had wood shop at the time. This was in, gosh, when was this? Middle school was in the mid '90s. So yeah, middle school was in the mid '90s, and that's where I really discovered like I love building things because I could just like I could see ideas in my head, and with the wood shop you have a lot more flexibility of creating the things that you wanted to create. You have all kinds of things from bandsaws and lathes and planers and drum sanders, drill presses, routers, biscuit joiners, everything. And so I was able to really do a lot of creative building work. And again, that was where I really focused my time and energy was, and I really like everything else. Again, I love learning. I hated doing schoolwork because to me it was just busy work. I would do great on tests. I would almost always get A's, maybe B's on tests, whether it was geography, spelling, even math and stuff like that, but I could never pull myself together to do the busy work because it didn't hold any interest for me. And and also I think in my head I was like, why do I need to do all this BS busy work when I can show you on the test? I understand how this works because I'm getting A's and B's on these tests. But that was never enough. Getting good grades on the test was never enough. So much of the grade, probably more than half of the grade, often was comprised of the busy work. And so I was getting C's, D's in most of my classes. Um, and and so when I get into high school, I'm still doing athletics. I'm killing it in football and track and field. I'm one of the top athletes on my teams throughout high school, and uh, and then in high school I continued doing the woodworking. I actually did woodworking all through like freshman to junior year, and then senior year. I kept wanting to get into art class, but I could never get into the art class. And it's just because when we went to sign up for classes, it just was never available. Everybody was always going to sign up for art first because it was an easy A. And so the people who really needed like that support and to learn techniques and push myself in art because I was actually artistic could not get signed up in the fucking art class. It was so frustrating. It was especially frustrating my senior year. I was starting to get into photography. I had gotten a really nice digital camera from my uncle, and this is probably in 2001 now. And I was psyched about learning about the different techniques and processes and manipulations you can do manually to get different effects. And I was reading books about photography and really getting into it. But my senior year, I could not get into a goddamn photography class because again, so many seniors wanted easy classes, easy A's. And because my group was one of the last groups, or was the last group to sign up for uh, photography class, I could not get into the class. And all these chuckleheads, basically, these ding dongs ended up taking the class who didn't give a shit about photography. They just wanted the easy A because it looks good, of course, on paper, where I was trying to take the class because I was genuinely interested in the class. Um, and and so I didn't end up taking it. It was a bummer. I did get into kind of it was like a individual study on my first in first period in high school, and and it was okay. It wasn't that great though. It was like the art teacher had a planning period first period, and so he allowed a couple students to during that class to be TAs, but they had their own kind of like private study, and he would give them assignments and stuff like that and keep them busy. But again, I still struggle with that because all I could think about is how frustrated I was that right next door was the photography class, and all I wanted to do was be in the photography class. I kept trying to get into there, and they kept kicking me out of there. But anyways, uh, Yeah, so all the way up through middle school, high school, even some in elementary, doing woodworking and stuff like that. And again, I was super athletic. Uh, I got all kinds of recognition and awards and stuff like that for my athletics. But art was really going to be my thing. But after high school, which I barely graduated high school, I think the threshold for graduating was 2.3, and I think I graduated 2.4. Again, it wasn't because I'm not smart. I think I have very shitty study skills, honestly, growing up, and now not only the dyslexia, which was a big hindrance with taking English classes and shit like that, and other kind of sociology classes and whatnot. Um, Learning now that I've just in the last year and a half been diagnosed with ADHD, which really affects. I've been finding that or learning about how it affects the brain and or how an ADHD brain works and thinks just differently more than anything. And nothing I was doing supported that. And um, so, in fact, even though I was taking an art class my senior year, I did not get an A in my art class. I think I got a B or a C because again, I was struggling with being feeling engaged with the artwork, the work, because I really wanted that photography class. And painting with watercolors and doing ceramics and stuff like that just did not engage me in a meaningful way. And so I just didn't really do the work, which is I don't encourage it. But I wish I had understood better how my brain works and how to work with that so that I could have done better in school. Um, and yeah, but my senior year, I did get it. I did get one A, and I think it was psychology, and psychology class was really interesting to me. So, um, psychology, just learning about people, and I think that's one of the things that's really stuck with me my whole life. I've always been really curious. And I remember talking to my grandmother about this years ago, but she told me, reflecting on when I was a kid, we were doing a road trip from Idaho. Like I flew over with her to Idaho, packed up a moving van, and drove it back to Washington. And we were just talking really the whole time, and it was actually pretty good. She and I don't really get along very well, but that was a good experience. But anyways, she was recalling when I was young, I was always very interested in learning about our family and our family history and different people, and looking through photo albums where kids maybe are building with Legos or doing all kinds of other kid stuff. I was looking for through the family photo albums, and I'm still to this day like super intrigued to learn about about people's histories, about their um the different challenges and stories. And that's something that always stuck with me. And I think part of the reason I was successful in that psychology class, and that trying to learn about people and understand people as well as myself and my own internal workings, is that it's learning about what it means to kind of be it sounds weird to say out loud, but learning about what it means to be human, really. And the human predicament, I guess, and all that. And senior year, I think, even though I struggled in my English class, I think I got a D in that class. I'm very thankful for the introduction to like the transcendental thinkers like Nathan Hawthorne and Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau were all very interesting to me in the way they saw the world and thought about the world, and kind of were hyper introspective. Was really interesting to me. Um, so that was education. Then after high school, which I barely graduated. I got I got into college, did a little bit of college, nothing too crazy. Again, even though I could sign up for my own classes, I struggled often with engaging with the busy work. And even though I thrived on tests, um, because I sucked at doing the busy work, I did not get very good grades. And so I would periodically sign up for classes, take classes, and then drop out and sign up for classes. And or I wouldn't drop out. I would finish a quarter, but I would not finish very successfully. And I think there were limitations on whether or not you could come back and sign back up again based on previous grades you've gotten in classes. So I kind of got to a point. I think I did the sign up and then stop and sign up and stop probably 3, maybe 4 different times, and that's when I started working in restaurants. um, and I think I graduated young. I graduated when I was 17, so I had a few years of trying to make community college work, and we actually have a really great community college here. I suck at school really more than anything. And um so I was gosh, I've had so many jobs. At the same time, when I was talking about earlier how we didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up, and so if I wanted to learn how to drive, that's when I first got a job, was when I was I think it was 15 and a half. I started working at McDonald's, was my first job. And um and because I had to pay for the additional cost of insurance as well as fuel, if I wanted to drive, which I think was good. And I did good at the job. It's not the craziest job in the world, but it can be really hectic and intensive for sure. And I worked that job for about a year and a half, until I graduated high school. Um, and then, so I must have been 15 and a half, graduated when I was 17. Yeah. So 15, a year and a half. And that was my introduction to the workforce. And since then, I've had probably, it's been a while since I've done the tally, but I've had close to 30 different jobs, anywhere from working in McDonald's to doing before and after school YMCA childcare, to working construction, working in many different restaurants, being an assistant instructor in salsa dancing, um, and I worked for nonprofits, building for down in Texas for the Habitat for Humanity through the AmeriCorps NCCC program. Um, I worked at a movie theater. I actually really loved working at the movie theater, tearing tickets and cleaning theaters because I loved watching movies. Another English class I took my senior year of high school was film literature, and learning about the process of filmmaking and the storytelling process and the history of it. Really, it was kind of a history class, even though it was film literature. There's a lot of history, and I love learning about history. History was another class that I always did really good in. I always got well, at least I got A's on the test, but I didn't necessarily in high school. I wasn't getting A's in the class because of all the busy work I was not doing. I did take a couple history classes though in community college, and as well as an astronomy class, and I got A's in all of those classes because it was engaging. It was interesting to me, and it all comes back to learning about histories and learning about and trying to understand cultures, especially when it comes to Western civilization and stuff like that, and then history of the universe and and what we understand about space and stuff like that was always very interesting to me, and so always killed that class. And those were, I think, the other reason those classes I was really successful in those classes is that they did not have busy work. They were lecture and test and lecture and test and lecture and test, and I killed them because that's what I'm best at. I love taking notes, especially about things I'm very interested in, and then I'm happy to take any test on about them because I know all the information. Anyways, so I work a lot of different jobs, and oh yeah, I even worked at a gas station. God, I used to clean out bathrooms at a gas station and stock the shelves in the cooler and stuff, which was not glamorous. And I think that was when I was like 20 to 21. And so I worked at McDonald's with my very first quote unquote restaurant job. But I would say my first real restaurant job was when I turned 21, I got a job working at a local brew pub called the Fishtail Brew Pub. And they used to be really well known for their organic beers, which to me, unfortunately, were never actually that good. But people were like, "Ooh, organic beers," and they were kind of like the first fancy organic beer, or first microbrewery organic beer. Maybe one. I don't know. They were one of the first making it big with organics. Anyways, the organic beers suck, but I love working at the restaurant. The rest of their beers were pretty good, and they were going through a remodel, and so I was helping with the remodel because of my construction background and history. And then I was washing dishes, and then I finally got up to the prep line and I was prepping, and then I was working on the cooking line and I was cooking, and I really loved that and the camaraderie, and I made a lot of great friends. Again, I had just turned 21. I also really loved playing pool, and so there was a great opportunity to get out and make strengthen those friendships through socializing, I guess, more than anything, playing pool. But I always pool is in the line of thought. Man, I'm so all over the place. In the line of thought of seeing lines, which is a big part of knife making for me. I've always excelled at marksmanship sort of sports, whether it's shooting, archery, handguns, rifles, archery, playing pool, bowling. These are all marksmanship games. Darts, because it's all about kind of like that hand-eye coordination. I've always had that ability, and I do think that hand-eye coordination, that having a strong relationship between what your eyes are seeing and what your hands are doing, is really important when it comes to knife making, and that is something I've really excelled at a lot throughout my life. And so, gosh, I just remember too, I used to I lost it for a second. What was I doing before? Did the salsa dancing, childcare. I had another thought of another random weird job I used to do. Anyways, all over the place. I had so many different jobs, and I really struggle. Oh, geez. I worked at Lowe's Home Improvement Warehouse. I used to be a night stalker at a grocery store called Safeway. And then I used to work in a warehouse stocking shelves, as well as delivering orders to customers. God, I hated customer service. I really struggle with customer service. But most of my jobs have been customer service. God, this is such a weird episode. Just my ramblings and talking about my life. It was after I started working at the Fishtail Brew Pub. I was trying to go to school again. I guess I did try to go to school again in my 20s, in my early 20s. And one of the classes I took was a PE class, and I had already taken like yoga, and I'd already taken weight training, and so I was looking for something else that looked interesting, and I saw that they had a PE, a salsa dancing class as one of the PE classes, and my introduction to salsa dancing was when my mom was taking a community course. Just at one of the local ballrooms downtown, and this gal was teaching salsa dancing, like beginner salsa dancing, and the lady wasn't actually that good, but she was raking it in, I'll tell you what. So good for her, I guess. But anyways, I showed up to pick up my mom because I think, God, I can't remember what the situation was, but she needed a ride for whatever reason. I think she had gone to the lesson with other people, but then they were going to do something else afterward, and she didn't want to join, so she had me come pick her up. Anyways, I was standing there on the sidelines. I got there a little bit early, maybe just like 10, 15 minutes early, and was watching them in this class, and I was like, because of my athletic background and my familiarity with movement and stuff like that, I was like, I could do that. What? This is fucking basic as shit. And but I never took the classes there. And it was probably actually a year after that. So that was in my late teens, early 20s when I picked her up and I at that moment. And then it was in my early 20s when I was working at the brew pub when I signed up for a class for trying going back to school, signed up for that PE class because it was either I pay $80 for that community course at that ballroom and I get 4 lessons, or so basically $20 a lesson, which is fucking expensive for the basic stuff she was teaching. Anyways, um, but again, good for her, good hustle. Anyways, or I take the PE class at the community college for the exact same price because it was a 1 credit class. Actually, it was just a little bit cheaper, but it was twice a week for the duration of a quarter, which was what, like month and a half? No, 2 months. I can't remember how long the quarters were. Or maybe I don't know. It ended up being something like almost 30 lessons. So it probably wasn't twice a week. It was maybe like either once it had to be at least once a week. So yeah, maybe it was just once a week. Um yeah. Once to twice a week. Anyways, sorry, I'm really struggling to remember this stuff. And that's where I met my friend Marie, and she was teaching the class, and I was just a student. And if any of you have taken a dancing class, especially guys, especially you single guys, and especially you single guys who aren't fucking creeps, um, taking a dance class, especially in community college, especially if you're a young guy, um, it is a really, really interesting, almost it's not even, I wouldn't say it's a social experiment, but it is. You don't interact with people this way in any other class. In the salsa dancing class or in a dance class, you are hand in hand with people, looking them square in the face, like you're about to give them a hug, like you're so close to them. It's a very intimate um experience, which is very unusual. And I honestly wish that um well, I guess it was, I'm glad it happened when it did, but because it would have been too awkward in middle school or high school to do something like that, I think, at least personally for me. um, but it was really incredible. And the other benefit of taking a dance class is that there are lots of women who love to dance and want to learn more and take a class because it sounds like fun, and very few guys. So if you're a guy taking a dance class in a class with 20 students and you're one of 3 dudes, um, and it's you become very popular very quickly, and especially if you learn the steps and you're good at it and you're fun to dance with, you're even that more of a commodity, I guess, in the class. I never ended up dating anybody that was in the class, um, but it was a really, really positive experience, and I'm very, very thankful for that. But again, that comes back to kind of like hand, eye, body, physical, like visual tied to the physical coordination and what's going on. And I think that, again, that comes back to kind of a form of athleticism that I experienced with sports and track and field and football and stuff like that. Um, and that translates into my knife making in a way. I joke that when I sharpen knives, I'm dancing with the knife because I kind of sharpen in an unusual way and I'm moving my feet the whole time. Especially when I change angles that I'm sharpening at, or changing directions when I just flip the blade over, I reposition my feet, and my hips are all moving, and I'm like doing this like moving kind of almost gyrating kind of motion. It's kind of silly and ridiculous, and I sometimes feel self-conscious about it. But I tell you what, I get some fucking good results, so I'm not going to be too hard on myself for it. Anyways, um, so it was in that class that I met Marie, and I started learning how to salsa dance. And after that class, she was um, she was very complimentary. She was amazed at how well I picked up everything and how good I was, and 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 then she asked me to become her dance partner at the end of the class, and so the summer following that class, I learned, and she had been dancing for years. I learned a lot of what she knew, probably like 75, 80% of what she had learned over the years in about 2.5 months. And boy, did I get into shape too. I was in fucking great shape. I think I lost 20 pounds because I was dancing basically in a second story loft with terrible insulation in the summertime. So it was hot as fuck, sweating my ass off and moving all the time. And I think I'm trying to remember now too. I don't think I had a car at the time. Um, and so my only form of transportation was either the busing system or bikes or walking. And so I was moving a lot too. Oh geez, I just remembered another job. I used to do landscaping for this guy's property. He was a private. I can't even remember how I met the guy. Oh, I was introduced to him by a friend's parents. They knew the guy, and they knew that he needed help on his property, and so I did a ton of landscaping, clearing fields of not pampas grass, but um, just overgrown fields that have been allowed to overgrow, clearing those, building a giant kind of garden shed slash chicken coop and chicken run, and building in a barn that he was building. Actually, it was a 3-car or maybe a 4-car garage with a loft above, and doing construction work in there. Anything from sheetrocking and mudding to finish work, and kind of everything in between. And yeah, building walls, brick walls, and shit like that. So many different jobs. I'll probably have to keep peppering them in there. And I'm sorry if it's like really frustrating and distracting. But hopefully I'll be able to keep it together so I can get back to where I was at. So I started dancing with Marie. And so she, um, we were teaching. I was actually helping teach the class over at SPS, or at the community college. I was helping her with private lessons. We were doing local performances to kind of promote the salsa dancing business. She would do kind of like introductory lessons to, like, there were local bands that would play salsa music around town, and so we would show up and kind of do an introductory level lessons, and she would teach, and I would be the lead side of the model. So basically, I was just like there, and I was modeling and doing the dancing with her and helping to instruct people. And then we'd kind of break out and walk around and help people where they needed help and stuff like that. Um, she got a job. She was a hustler. She was like on top of running the salsa dancing business. I think she had at least two other jobs, and one of them was doing book work for a company, an athletic outfitter, like an outdoor, like hiking and cycling and stuff, like downhill mountain biking kind of company called Olympic Outfitters locally. And she used to do their book work and stuff like that. And that place was closing down, and she was needing new work, and they introduced her to a friend of theirs named Bob Kramer, and he was in need of somebody because it was just him. He was just running the show by himself, doing all the knife making as well as all the customer interaction, emails, and bookkeeping and stuff like that. And he had things in motion that were gonna require him to be doing more of just the knife making and less of the other stuff. And so when that Olympic Outfitters closed down, she met Bob. She got a job working for Bob, and she started doing his bookkeeping and in front of the house kind of administrative work, and customer engagement and everything for him. And I think it was a couple months after that she introduced me to him. And so the way the introduction came about was that I I was working at the restaurant. I had worked at several restaurants. I'd left town at one point, and I was working that I'd left and gone and worked for AmeriCorps. I came back. I started working in the restaurant again, the Fishtail Brew Pub. It was kind of like my go-to, like my fallback plan always. I could always come back there and work. And if anything, I could just at least pick up shifts washing dishes. And so I was doing that again, but I was not loving being there. And I was after having a taste of the world, experiencing the world, because when I went into AmeriCorps, I had gone the furthest east I'd ever gone, because I think the furthest east to that point that I'd gone in my life was like, I think it was like Rexburg, Idaho, or something like that. And so then they shipped me out to Maryland. So at first I flew into Atlanta, then I went to Maryland, and then from Maryland we drove across many states to get like through Tennessee and Virginia and all the whatever Georgia and states, Louisiana, Alabama, to get down to Beaumont, Texas, where I worked in Beaumont, Texas for Habitat for Humanity, building houses and leading volunteer teams and basically keeping people on task and showing them what needed to be done and whatnot. Anyways, I got back from that, and that all of a sudden, like, that opened my eyes to a whole new world, so much bigger than the small Olympia, Washington town that I'd grown up in my whole life. And so when I got back, I had nothing to fall back on except for working in restaurants again. And I was kind of at a loss. I started, let's see, I started working in the restaurant again. I started working with Chris again, doing the private lessons and dancing and stuff like that. But I was really at a loss, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I was 20, gosh, how old was I? I think I was 23 at the time. I was going on 24 actually when I met Bob, because I got back in May, and then I was working in a restaurant, working until like October is when I met Bob. And I didn't know what to do with myself and in my life. I was just kind of like half-ass working this job, living in a not the greatest situation, renting a room, I think, at a house, and it was not fucking glamorous. And this was in my like early to mid 20s. I guess it's technically my early 20s, 23. Anyways, actually, I think at this point I was 24. I was in AmeriCorps when I was 23. Anyways, 24. I was actually about to skip town and move up to Bellingham, Washington, which is where Western Washington University is located. I have many friends going to school up there because they're college age and they're taking classes and living up there. And I'd visited them, and it's beautiful there. It's even more beautiful and interesting now than it was then. And I mean, I'm sorry, but I was a single guy, and there were so many beautiful girls going to school up there. Like, it was insanity. And so I was like, why don't I move up there and get a job working in a restaurant there? I'm super confident I can get a job, no problem, working wherever, doing whatever in whatever restaurant. And I'll work, I'll rent, I'll hang out. And I was just looking to do that and just like be a kitchen bum and live in a cool place, working a shitty job, but experiencing fun things and meeting interesting people. And honestly, like, it's kind of sad to reflect on now, but at a time in my life, like, that was kind of the only expectations I had for myself. I wasn't good at school. So I had no delusions of going back and finishing a college degree, which means I had no delusions of getting a really fancy, high-paying job. I was basically probably going to be doing some sort of labor work of some sort, blue-collar shit, for the rest of my life, which is honestly, that's still where I'm at. And I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm speaking about it really negatively. I think I had come to terms with the idea that I was never going to be really amount to anything, which sounds kind of sad, actually. I was just going to be a dude working in a restaurant. And So anyways, I was ready to skip town. I had friends I was ready to move in with. I was like literally weeks away from moving. Um, and my friend Marie introduced me to Bob. And the preface was because she and I, because we had spent so much time, we had spent like, let's see, years dancing together. Probably 3 or 4 years at that point, teaching together, dancing together, became very good friends. And so she and I at that time I was kind of having like a quarter life crisis, basically. I, I, and we had many heart to hearts, um, and she had just gotten the job working for Bob, and she's like, you should meet this guy I work for. He's really interesting. And, in fact, she was like, he's a bladesmith. And I was like, what the fuck does that mean? I had no idea what that meant. She's like, well, like in movies there are blacksmiths, or there's like reenactment villages and stuff, right? And I was like, okay, yeah, I've seen Lord of the Rings, I'd seen stuff like where they're blacksmiths. She's like, well, he does that, but he does it just making knives. I'm like, people still do that? I had no idea. I was so unaware. And reality is like there's still billions of people in the world who have no idea. But the number's growing, the ones that know. So anyways, sorry, Mike, I'll get to your question in just a second. I just got to finish this train of thought or I'm going to lose it, I guarantee. So I met Bob. So she's like, he's really interesting. I know you're feeling at a loss with where you're at in your life. He's been all over the place. He's traveled around the world. He's had a bunch of different businesses. He was even a clown for Ringling, Barnum and Bailey. He's a really interesting guy, and I think you guys would get along really well. And I think maybe you can have a conversation, and there might be some insight that he can offer you. And so I was like, great, cool. I was good with that. So we actually met at my job on one of my days off, and we got fish and chips and a couple beers. And I thought we were just going to have kind of like a meet and greet kind of BS session. And so I kind of talked to him, or he talked to me about, what my past experience and what I've done with my life up to this point, and where I wanted to go and aspirations. And I really didn't have any aspirations except for to just, I don't know, what's the word for somebody who is just trying to get the most out of life. Not an exhibitionist. What are they called? Anyways, I was just like, in my mind, life was like this crazy kind of unique opportunity and gift, which it honestly is. I still believe that. But I was like, I just wanted to get experiences out of the world. That's all I wanted to do. I had no direction except for to try to get the most out of every experience that I possibly could, out of every opportunity. Bon vivant. I don't know that word, but I'm sure that's right along with it. My buddy likes to use this word, and I cannot think. I'm sure it'll come to me at some point. But anyways, I was just trying to get the most out of life, out of every opportunity, out of every moment that I possibly could, and so I had no direction. And what I didn't know is that Bob had finished a really big interview with a writer for the New Yorker, and that he was anticipating a bunch of an influx of interest and desire for his work, and that he was going to need somebody in the shop. And so he, at the end of our conversation, which was like an hour and a half, his wife was actually there too, and both of them were kind of, oh shit. Looks like I'm new to podcast interviewing. I forgot to turn off that alarm. Sorry. They offered me an opportunity to work in the shop with Bob. He made no promises. He could not commit to anything. Best he could do was just offer me a chance to try it out. He couldn't commit to any certain number of hours or anything like that. And so um, I was, like I said, I was working at the restaurant, so I had to give them my 2 weeks, which he respected and appreciated. And then I started working for him. Um, and oh, actually, you know what? I think what happened before I gave my 2 weeks and committed to going to Bob, I had a couple trial days where I came and worked and basically just cleaned up at the shop. Bob kind of showed me around the shop and gave me some tasks to do as well as some cleaning to do, and I did all the job. And I don't know if that was the litmus test, but after a couple of those, he said that's when he offered, offer or we had a conversation about what I needed to like live and get by and all that kind of stuff. And I think for him, he was trying to decide if he could basically afford to take me on full time or what I needed for full time at least in regards of employment. And he felt confident that he could give me what I was getting paid at the restaurant. So I gave my 2 weeks to the restaurant. I started working for Bob, and yeah, he had and I think the article in the New Yorker came out maybe a week or two later, and things got super crazy and super busy. And he needed, which I completely understand, he needed somebody in the shop following him around. Um, Not literally, but just cleaning up because his focus needed to be on knives and not really anything else. He got Marie in the office doing the office stuff. He got somebody, me, in the shop, kind of following around, cleaning things up, keeping things in order and tidy so that he can come back to every time he finished a knife, he just start again without any of the other bullshit of cleaning work. And over time, he passed on more and more work to me. Um, I think it started with I think it was like cutting out blades, blade profiling, drilling holes, kind of getting things set up for handle assemblies, um, and then primary grinding blades, and then before heat treat, getting them ready for heat treat, um, and then handle sculpting. And it was very interesting to me, honestly. It was a kind of a regular 9 to 5 ish. Um, and I was still and I was able to still have a life outside of it, and it was really positive. And Bob was a really positive mentor for me to get to know and look up to. And we worked together for several years. We worked together for 3 years actually, and then it it got to a tension point, and it's always hard to talk about because I guarantee Bob was not looking for basically an adopted son. But when I was a sophomore in high school, my parents divorced, and up to that point, um, my stepdad was the father figure. And then after that, I didn't really have much of a father figure in my life. I looked to other friends' dads, especially coaches. Some of my coaches were even some of the teachers at the high school I went to. Um, but even still, none of them over the 4 years that I went to school, I didn't, I don't think I even came close to spending half as much time with them as I did with Bob, working 5 days a week, year round, 8 hours, whatever, 6 to 8 hours a day, depending on the day and the work that needed to be done, or if Bob was traveling and stuff like that. And he really became like a father to me, which, like I said, I guarantee he was not looking for a son figure. But me, and I don't think I was doing it consciously, but I really looked up to him like he was a surrogate father in a way. And and I was really struggling at a point with um I think really, I guess, feeling appreciated. And so uh, at the time too, was I was a single guy, and chasing girls, and so lots of late nights. And while I was still getting work done at the shop, there were times where I'm trying to think. I don't. And Bob might say otherwise, and that's really a question for him. But I feel like I was still doing what was required of me, what was needed of me to for the business to continue to be successful. And I do think that there were times in there where, I fucked up, where like I was out until 3 o'clock in the morning with friends, and we were all gussied up and dressed up and shit like that, for whatever reason on a Sunday night. and and then waking up and be like, oh fuck, I gotta be at work, and driving straight to work. And honestly, like, I was still in my fancy ass clothes and all that shit. And I was like, I fucked up. I should have was supposed to get up an hour earlier, get home, change clothes, go to the shop, go to work. And I didn't do that. I slept too late. I got to the shop like right as I was supposed to be there. And dressed up in slacks and a vest and a tie and all this shit and button down shirt and all that. And I honestly, I was ready to work because that was on me. And if anything, if my clothes got fucked up, then guess what? I get to buy new clothes. But I was ready to work. But it was stuff like that, where I was really kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit. But I was kind of always pushing the boundaries in a way, um, because I think for some reason I've always done that as a kid. I've worked really hard to understand the rules and the boundaries as best as I can, and then I figure out how to work as tight to those boundaries as I possibly can. And it wasn't always successful, and it caused shit like me showing up to the shop, um, you know, fully clothed and dressed up for to the nines for a night out on the town with friends, to a workshop, to a metal shop, and that's not really the best thing to do, be doing, or to be showing up to work dressed like that. I'm sure it wasn't even the highest quality stuff. A lot of it was probably like rayon and polyester. So if a spark got on me, I was gonna catch fire anyways. So I'm remembering that day. Bob sent me home to get changed, and then I started basically an hour late that day. Um, but I think, anyways, it's periodic occasions like that over the 3 years, and it kind of went in cycles of about 6 to 8 months where we'd have to have these sit downs and chats. And I finally, it just, unfortunately, it came to a head at a time where I was experiencing some real physical problems with my body, in relation to the work. I'm sure anybody who has done this work, for long periods of time, have had or experienced severe back issues. And at the time, we'd just gotten a set in from Bob. Oh my fucking god! I'm so sorry. Turn the fuck off, Jesus Christ. Okay. At the time, we had just gotten a set of knives in. I think it was like a set of 6 or 8 knives that needed to be refurbished. They were a really old set. I think Bob had made them maybe four at the time, like made them 4 or 5 years prior. I can't really remember, honestly. He at the time, he'd been making knives already for about 10, 15 years at that point when he met me, or when I met him. Anyways, the knives need to be refurbished. The handles that experienced some swelling. A couple of the handles need to be reconstructed, or like ripped off, and new handle scales put on and resculpted. And I was railing on these handles. I think we got them in on Thursday. I started working on them Friday. No, sorry, we got them in like in the middle of the week. So I was working on them Thursday, Friday, nonstop. And and then weekend, did the weekend, finished them up on Monday, and then the next day, and that was resculpting all the handles, resculpting, repolishing, um, reassembling a couple handles, sculpting those, and getting everything dialed in so they were fucking beautiful. And then that Tuesday, my back, I actually was up early. I was feeling good and excited, get into the shop because I just finished that set, and I can't remember what was going on. I think I was like, at the time I was making the steel in the shop, so I think I was probably excited to get back to forging or something, making some cool steel. And actually, I remember I just finished up making some steel, and so I was maybe getting ready to cut out blades or do some primary grinding or something. I don't know what. Anyhow, um, and as I continued to go, get ready for the day, making my lunch, getting all this shit ready, as I got into the truck and started driving to work, my back, like the whole time, my back was getting progressively more and more feeling more and more excruciating pain. And I'd had bursts of back pain throughout my life, especially working in construction and working in, like, especially when I worked at Lowe's. Like, I was doing all kinds of stupid shit, like throwing around 60-pound bags of concrete, and carrying like 6 by 8 by 16 foot long beams through the store because it's a special order for somebody instead of using a rolling cart. I was just dumb and young and strong at the time. I think it was like 19 when I was doing that shit, 18, 19. Um, and so I'd have experienced back pain, but this was something completely different. And and I called in, left a message on the voicemail. I couldn't come in. I was trying to get into a doctor, got into a doctor, did all the doctor shit. Um, eventually, um, and got back with Bob the next day after going to the doctors and stuff. And unfortunately, and so I had suggestions from the doctor of what to do, so that I can work more effectively and honestly take better care. Because realistically, like, um, what's the word? Is it not ergonomics? Maybe it is ergonomics of the body. We're trying to figuring out how to work smarter to take better care of my body so that I could continue to do the work, with fewer issues to my body. And that's like really, and for anybody who's knife making, um, or any kind of stationary job, really, a lot of the work is not the forging. Although a lot of people think it's the forging, a lot of the work is the grinding. A lot of time grinding blades, profiling blades, grinding handles, sculpting handles, hunched over a workbench, hunched over a hand sanding setup, hunched over, hunched over, hunched over, hunched over. Take breaks and take them often, and they don't have to be long breaks. There are apps you can get. I think there's one called the Pomodoro app, I believe, or Pomodoro timer. Pomodoro is an Italian word for tomato, and it refers to the tomato timers. And basically, what you do is you set up a period of time for when you want to take a break. Maybe it's 20 minutes, maybe it's 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever it is. Especially if you're going to be doing a lot of grinding, which is a lot of stationary standing work, you should be taking breaks more frequently. At least every 45 minutes at the bare minimum, if not half an hour or 20 minutes, 25 minutes. If you can manage to do that. It is hard. I know this. It is hard to break that up because I especially get so caught up in what I'm doing that I just want to keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Because especially if I'm sculpting or I'm blade grinding, you get into a flow. Sometimes you can't break that flow. I completely understand it, but if you can, anytime you can outside of that, take those breaks. And literally, all you're doing, because you're hunched over, do the opposite, do the reverse, or the inverse, I guess. So chest out, arms out, head back, roll your neck around. And even right now, I can feel there's some really there's some tightness in my. I think these tendons and muscles are called the scalenes that connect from kind of between your collarbone up to your neck. Anyways, stuff like that. Um, do a back bend. So put your hands on your hips and bow yourself back as best you can. You want your legs kind of a little bit spread. Um, Probably like twice shoulder width or whatever. Yeah, just that way you have balance. Reach down to your toes. Do some twists. Like this is all shit that takes maybe 3 minutes. And then guess what? Get a drink of water, hydrate yourself, because that's also another problem I really struggle with and have always struggled with. Drink some water. If you got to go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom, whatever, and fucking go back to work. I'm not trying to be a driver, but I know a lot of us are really self-driven in that way when it comes to our knife making. And I 100% am that person. And I did not know those things about the body beforehand. And my back freaked the fuck out. But I really think that there was an issue with communication. Especially that day, Bob didn't get my message, and so basically it looked like I was just a fucking no-show. And I think there is a misunderstanding about my extracurricular activities outside of work, and unfortunately that was it. Over the 3 years, I think Bob had got to the point where he was tired of dealing with me, and so he let me go. And so I was fired, which was a really hard bullet. What is it? Pill to swallow. Almost said bullet to swallow. That was a really hard pill to swallow. And I guess maybe it did feel like a bullet. Because again, as I was referring to earlier, to me, Bob was like really like the dad I never had. And honestly, in hindsight, I think a responsible father figure probably would have done the same thing. Honestly, you can only give so many chances before motherfucker's got to learn his goddamn lesson, really. And again, unfortunately, it was on the heels of me experiencing a severe body injury. But it was all the shit leading up to that periodically over the years that made that the last straw. And so, yeah, so it was a hard one for me, and I'd become, yeah, it was like if anybody's ever gotten a divorce or gone through a really hard breakup, like that's what it felt like to me, in a weird way. And again, I think in reflecting upon it now, over many years of it happening, I think that was in 2011, and so it's been 13 years since, well, I guess 12 years, basically a little over 12 years since Bob fired me. And I still think about it. And I think it still hurts a little bit, unfortunately, but I am more and more, I have a better understanding of where he's coming from. Because honestly, if I were, because I'm in a somewhat similar situation as he was when he hired me. I've been making knives for 10 years now at this point. Well, I think cumulative of 10 years, but on my own since 2014. So 10 years. So, oh, Jesus. Cumulative 13 years on my own for 10 years. And if I've hired somebody as close as we would become, and as much of kind of a mentor relationship that we would develop, if those things, because this is like, for me, my knife making is my life. This is my passionate pursuit. And I would have a hard time not taking that personally if somebody, if I didn't feel like the appreciation and respect was there from the person that was working for me. um and it would be hard to have those experiences over and over again, to where I would eventually have to say, you know what, I think I'm good working on my own again. I gotta let you go. I could see, honestly, I could see myself doing the same fucking thing. So I for a long time I held resentment, but I think a lot of that was sadness and anger, and honestly some heartbreak from losing somebody that to me was like the father, the father I never had. And but at the same time, I can see more and more as I get older, and again as I do work. I've been, I've, over the years, I've started talking to therapists. I've had a few different therapists over the years, and not necessarily talking about this, but just talking about life and stress and knives and relationships and all kinds of shit. Um, but doing that inner work has helped me to come to a better appreciation of where he was at when that all happened, and why that was the, for him at that time. And I guarantee, I don't think he would do anything different if this situation occurred again. I can understand where he was coming from for sure. So after that, um, I like literally the next day, I was like, all right, well, I can fucking feel bad for myself and sit here and have a fucking pity party and feel depressed and climb into bed and or drink my fucking face off, or I have fucking rent to pay, I have shit to do, and get right back fucking to it. And and so I went out the next fucking day. I mean, the day started out really rough and I was feeling super bummed and depressed. And and then and I got a job. I got a fucking job like immediately, working in a pizzeria, which is next to knife making is my second work love, I guess. I love making pizzas. And so I got a job working at a Neapolitan pizzeria here in town, and I started doing that. And um, yeah, so that was a hard chapter in my life for sure. And it was, again, it took a long time for me. It has taken me, and even today, I still have. I don't necessarily hold uh, resentment, I think, towards Bob anymore. But I did, like I said, for a long time, because it felt so fucking unjust. And but the reality is, you know, now I feel like I have a better understanding of the position he was coming from. I don't blame him. And and honest again, I think it was somewhat more of the fatherly thing to do. So um if it wasn't for that, honestly, I wouldn't be here talking to you probably, because after that I started working in a restaurant, um and trying to figure some shit out. And I moved to Denver because I had friends that lived in Denver, and Denver had a really cool food scene. And so for me, I need to back up. Like I said, up to the time where I worked for Bob, I had had a ton of jobs. I probably had at least up to uh I think when I was in AmeriCorps, I did a tally and I can't remember the entire tally, but I had like my AmeriCorps job was my 24th job that I'd had up to that point in my life, and I was 23 at the time. And so, um, I I kind of like slipped. Oh, so my job working for Bob, even though I worked for Bob for 3 years, and that was the longest job I'd ever held at ever. Because I think up to that point, actually, the job I held the longest consecutively was working at a gas station where I was cleaning bathrooms and stocking shelves and cleaning gas pumps and fucking mowing lawns and shit. Did that for a year and a half. The restaurant, working at Fishtail Brew Pub, I worked on and off there multiple times, and that was probably a total of maybe 2 years. So, but the longest consecutive time I'd ever spent at any one employer was working for Bob, and up to that point. So, but to me, that job working for Bob was not a passion, a passion, a call to. I don't know what the fucking word is right now. I'm struggling. It wasn't a passionate pursuit. It wasn't. I was good at the work. I was actually, turns out I'm pretty fucking good at this work. And I was this good, working for Bob. But to me, it was just another job that I was good at. All the different jobs I'd had up to that point, I learned how to do the job very quickly. I got very good at it, no matter what it was. Um, and and then I got bored with it. And knife making, I wasn't getting bored with it. It was things, like I said, things that gotten to a point with me and Bob where um, there were frustrations with me from Bob, for Bob, and then there were frustrations of my own that I was having and struggling with, um, and it really just came to a head, and we split ways. So um, it was later. It was it was actually within. So I got the job working for the pizzeria. Worked there, and then I started. I was reading food magazines about and I can't remember what else I was watching, but I was learning about Denver and Denver's rising food scene, and Denver was a cool town, and so I went and I got a job there. I worked. I found a place to live. I got a job working at. It was honestly not the greatest place. It was a sports bar um, that way overextended itself. They had probably like close to like 50 items on the menu. Um, Way overextending themselves because their kitchen was probably not much bigger than most home kitchens. It was such a pain in the ass to work in that kitchen. Um, and but I worked there. I kept trying to pursue nicer restaurants while I was there, but everybody there wanted a culinary education background. And at that point, I had already worked in restaurants for many years, and I was not interested in paying for a $200,000, um, yeah, $200,000 education, culinary arts education. I think it was 200,000, maybe it was 100,000. I don't know. Anyways, it was fucking expensive. It was a lot of money that I did not have. So I was not interested in doing that. I almost found a couple places, but they wanted me to stage, which was fine, but they wanted a lot of time, and I already had one job. So basically, working a second job without pay that overlapped with my pre-existing job, I just couldn't do it. And it was also in that time. So sorry. So I was fired by Bob in October. Actually, it was October of 2011, and I moved to Denver in February or March of 2012. Yeah, and then January. Yeah, it was January or February 2012, and then I was in Denver only for like 4 months. It was like April, May. No, it must have been because I had just gotten back, and then a friend was getting married in July. June comes before June. May, April, March. Yeah, yeah. So I must have moved. I moved to Denver in March. I. That's right. That's what I did. I did a visit in January to find a place and get a place locked down. And then I came back, worked a couple more months, got my shit together into a storage unit, really, basically, and then took only like I didn't even have a vehicle. I sold my vehicle um, before I moved, so I took like 2 suitcases and moved to Denver in March, and then it was between March, or it was in that time in Denver, trying to pursue restaurants, fancier restaurants, nicer restaurants with more interesting techniques and food going on, and not being able to land anything anywhere, which is really unusual. Felt really unusual for me and foreign because I, up to that point, had had no problem getting jobs, and but I was also coming from a much smaller market where I think in the Olympia area, which was in Olympia, Washington, which is it's hard to find good help in Olympia, Washington, where in Denver, they have a much larger pool of potential employees to draw from. And so I think that was really the biggest thing. And so the best I could do, yeah, was that sports bar. Hated the sports bar. Was trying to get into nicer restaurants and was struggling to do that. And the whole time, actually, not the whole time, but off and on, I was still drawing Damascus patterns. And then I started drawing knife designs. And I was starting to draw designs that were kind of my own take on a culinary knife. That was really, I mean, it's hard to not take some influence from my time working for Bob, which Mike, I think his question comes in perfect. He says, was Bob Kramer the first time you handled a high performance kitchen knife? And actually, Mike, I worked for Bob for I think at least well over a year before I'd ever actually used and cut with one of his knives. Um, and yeah, but yeah, it was the very first time I'd ever cut with a high performance culinary knife. I had never used a tool like that before, and it was it was different for sure. Very different experience, and so it was. I I was drawing patterns. I was drawing knife designs and noodling with drawing with knife designs, and I had some concepts, and I was like, I think, and I was reflecting on my time with Bob and all the various jobs. Like I said, I'd had at least at that point, I'd had 25 or 26 jobs, and reflecting on all the jobs. And while like I said, I had picked everything up very quickly and learned things and gotten good at the jobs all very quickly. Um, I, if I, it hit me that knife making was possibly the only work that I'd ever done that I might actually be great at. And it was I was reflecting on a note card that this is when I was sitting in Denver in the living room of the house I was living in and drawing some stuff out, and I was remembering a note card that Bob had received from a customer who was a surgeon that worked at Stanford University Hospital, which is actually the hospital that I was born at. Um, and the guy was the doctor was incredibly, actually, I think last I saw, you could still actually find that. I think you can find it on as a like a review or what is it? Not testament. Um, anyways, from customers, customer reviews on Bob's page. It used to be up there. I don't know if it's still there anymore. But anyways, the guy was like, As a surgeon, performing at a high level, um, the engagement with the tool is really important to me, and it was something to the effect of how the handle was so extremely comfortable and felt like such a natural extension of his hand that it made using the knife that much more intuitive. Um, and and he was just really thankful to Bob about the knife. And the reason Bob shared that note card with me was because that was my handle. I had I mean, it was Bob's style, but I had done the sculpting work, and 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 he wanted to, I share that with me to kind of reinforce um, that I was doing good work, and 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 it was in reflecting on that and drawing out patterns and drawing out knife designs and stuff like that. I was like, the light went off. That I was like, holy shit, that wasn't just the job. I think that 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 knife making might be my calling. That it might be that one thing that I'm actually great at, out of all the various things that I've done or could do in this world. I've found a craft that is very in line with uh, with all the things that I've excelled at throughout my life, um, in athletics and in creativity and building and designing, building furniture and woodworking and hand-eye coordination, all that stuff. It all comes together in knife making. And I really owe a massive thank you to Bob Kramer um, for well, and also Marie. Now that I'm thinking about it, I really owe a massive thank you to Marie for introducing me to Bob, and then for Bob offering me the opportunity um, to work for him. Because, yeah, I think this job, this work that I'm doing, this craft that I'm in, really is my calling. And it, I get people still ask me, why do I share too much? Or they tell me that I'm sharing too much. Now, I've definitely slowed down over the years, but from time to time, I do still get those messages, or I get those text messages, or I get those calls from people. And I think, I think the reason I share so much as I have, and a big drive for having this Patreon, is that to be able to find that for oneself should honestly be the pursuit of every human being in this world. To you got to go through getting a basic education and stuff like that and understanding stuff, but um after that, we should all be the drive should be to discover what our personal genius is, what our calling is, what it is that we do best, so that we can share that with the world. Just imagine, like, pause for a second. If you're driving, don't close your eyes, but just think, like, and try to imagine a world where everybody they're not driven by money, they're driven by their pursuit of discovering their personal genius, what they do best, so that they can contribute that to the world, so that the people who are the best knife makers are making knives, so that the people who are the best at storytelling are making movies and writing stories, so that the people who are the best to provide hospitality are in restaurants and hotels taking care of people, so that the best logical minds are behind, law and political sciences and government. The people who are actually the best and meaning the best through their and through their work, trying to provide a service to others, and through doing that work, um, teaching others potentially, or inspiring others to discover their own thing. And maybe they try out, say for me, people people are trying out knife making all the time. Um, maybe it's for them, maybe it's not. But part of seeing knife makers executing and creating work at really high levels, the inspiration drives somebody, and it connects with somebody. It doesn't connect with everybody, but it connects with some people. And it in a way, it gives them permission to pursue that themselves. Maybe that's their thing. Maybe it's not. Maybe their thing is being a really great dad. Maybe their thing is being a really great cook, chef. Maybe their thing is being a musician or visual artist, photographer. Um, for every job out there in the world, there's somebody who's the best at it. And I, I mean, we don't need to get too deep into, well, who's going to take out the garbage? There are jobs that people are still going to fucking need menial jobs on their path to discovering what their shit is. And maybe it is, maybe that is their thing. I cannot sit behind a seat driving all day long, but there are people who fucking thrive on long haul truck driving, or driving large machinery, and that's their thing. And I'm psyched for them that they found that work, and that they're doing it, and I'm sure they're doing it at a really high level, and they're finding value in it for themselves, and they're providing for themselves and their families. Anyways, so I share because if something that I share it helps give somebody permission to pursue this work, and might discover that this is their thing, or to inspire somebody to maybe not necessarily pursue this, but to re-inspire somebody to figure out what their thing is. And if it helps any makers find that this craft is their calling. I mean, it's been so powerful for me to discover this and know and learn this for myself, that if anything I can do and share helps others to discover that for themselves, I am fucking happy for that. I'm so happy for that, because I really think that that's what everybody should be aiming to pursue, to accomplish, and striving to do in this world, is to find the thing that they do best and do it and share it with the world. So anyways, I realized that knife making could be my thing. And I actually, at that point, because I'd already done it for 3 years, I realized that that was my thing. And so then I started, while I was still living in Denver, trying to find somewhere where I could do knife work. Somewhere where I could have access to tools. I was looking at maker spaces and stuff, but none of them were really geared for a lot of heavy grinding. I couldn't figure out a directory of any kind of makers that I might be able to, because I had skills that were valuable and that I could share with other people, and basically try to do a trade of sorts, where either I rent space or I trade knowledge for time in shops. But I couldn't find anybody in Denver. And I now know that there are lots of people in Denver. I just didn't know how to find them at the time. What I did know was, back in Washington, I knew of a bladesmith and blacksmith named Dave Lish, who had a shop in Seattle. He had his own blacksmith shop, and then adjacent to his shop, like it was a giant old, like, Cooper's building. They formed copper and shit like that down in Lesotho and Seattle. That then had been split up into several artist studios. Right next to his blacksmith shop, he had a school where he had extra equipment, where he had extra space, where I potentially could start working. And so I got back to Washington after being in Denver. I moved back to Washington, basically in, like, I think it was like it must have been like or late June or something like that. Early, yeah, late sometime in June. And I think, and I what did I do? I think I actually tried going back to working, going back to work at the pizzeria, and I wasn't enjoying that. I think and then I went back to working at Fishtail for a little bit, and I was not digging on that. And all right, after all that, I went back to washing dishes in a restaurant, and and it was a nicer restaurant in town, and like nice as in like they were selling wagyu burgers and had all this like fancy shit. It was one of the nicer restaurants in town, but in regards to or like yeah, anyways, it wasn't the fanciest place, but it was good. And I had a buddy that worked there and he knew about my knife work. And I think one of the things I was doing when I got back is I was trying to connect with people I knew who were in the service industry and sharpening knives for people. And I think I ran into a friend out and about, and he knew what I was doing, and he was a chef and a cook and very talented. And he's like, you know what? I'll pay. I would. I need my knife sharpened, and I'll pay you to sharpen my knives. And I was like, really? I was like stoked. Um, and at this time, like I didn't like I came back to Olympia with so little money. I was surfing on a friend's couch. Um, and I was actually ended up surfing on a few friends' couches for a while from June. Like I said, in June, it wasn't until about February that I actually got a solid place. So I was, I think referring to it as homeless is not fair because there are some people out there really fucking struggling. So I would just call it couch surfing. I did not have a solid home. I still had a storage locker, so it was like a 10 by 10 storage. So I had somewhere for all my shit. And then I had my, I had a bicycle and I had a luggage full of clothes. That's it. And I was washing dishes at this restaurant, which slowly became washing dishes and prepping. And, but there was no real nowhere to go up from there. Um, they weren't looking for servers, they weren't looking for bartenders, and so and I had no experience in that, but I was really like I was open to bar backing and bussing tables and shit like that, and I just never got to it. So and I honestly like in my mind I was focused on trying to find my way back to knives. How do I get back to knives? First, I just had to cover my bills. And honestly, like washing dishes, there's not a lot of money being made there. And so from there, I went to another restaurant that it was just opening, that I kind of had some connections to. Um, and it was a bakery. And so I started working there and I was washing dishes and prepping there. And I did that. Oh gosh, I can't remember. Maybe for oh, I did that for about 6 months. Yeah, I did that for about 6 months. And, and in that time, that's when I was able to finally so actually it was almost a year after I got back to Washington. It took me, that long to get into a solid place, to get a solid job. So I was consistently capable of paying bills before I could finally get up to Seattle and start talking to Dave um about the potential to work out a deal for me to work out of his shop because I had a ton of skills and I had no equipment. Um, and he had a bunch of equipment. He also has his own skills, but most of his skills are tailored more toward Bowie knives, hunters, and the blacksmithing work that he was doing. And so I started. We did kind of like a test run and of me making a knife and with some instruction from him on like his process, because he was forging all of his knives. Where when I worked for Bob, we would forge the steel, but then we would stock remove the blades from the steel that we were making. We did no blade forging there, and so blade forging was very new to me. And but it's not like, unfortunately, Dave had his own shit going on, and so he couldn't really commit a lot of extra time to me. So I would, from time to time, let's see, my first knife was a blade that he had already forged out, and it was an integral. So and so we heat treated that knife together using salt pots. And I'm trying to think, I did all the finish grinding, profiling, finish grinding. Um, he showed me his approach to using a small wheel attachment with an integral grind, or with a, he made like an integral grinding jig for cleaning up the transition from the blade to the bolster. Um, he showed me how handles get attached, and then, but then the rest was me. Um, but again, it wasn't a very, it was actually, I don't even feel right saying it wasn't a very formal. It was not formal at all. It was, if you've ever been to a hammer in, it was essentially the equivalent of a hammer in demonstration for um how to do these things. But fortunately for me, like I said, I picked things up really quickly. I already had a lot of skill and understanding on my end, and ability. The forging aspect was really the trickiest part, and I would come over and I would watch him forge on a power hammer. But on the school side, there wasn't a power hammer. There was a press. He forged a blade under the press once as a demonstration, and then he stood by while I forged one, and then that was it. And then I was on my own. And so I started. That's where I started, and that was in 2013. Right? Oh shit! I guess maybe I've been doing this on my own for 11 years, and 11 years. I'm learning things about myself right now. So I was doing that in June of 2013. That knife, but I wasn't up there until the knife was done. I would go up and work a couple days a week, basically on my time off from the bakery. I would drive up. I had friends that lived up there. I had an uncle that lived up there, and so I'd stay with friends and people I knew and family. Work at the shop really only 1, maybe 2 days a week, and then come back down and work my bakery job. The bakery job was horrendous because I think I was maybe making $1,000 a month. Um, working fucking, I was working close to 40, probably 30 to 40 hours, 30 to 36 hours a week, and making about $1,000 a month. And when I finally finished that knife up, I think we sold it. Dave had somebody he knew that was interested in buying it. I think it sold for like $1,500 or something like that. And we split that, and I was like, shit, that's a great payday. And so and then I realized, okay, if I can make that much from one knife, then I can, because of my experience with Bob, I can work in batches. Excuse me. I can work in batches, and I can make way more knives and multiply that. So my deal with Dave was everything I made, he got 50%, and which was a big cut. But he had all the tools, he had all the materials. I had all the skill, but none of the other shit and none of the extra money to pay for stuff. So it was definitely a way to get started. It wasn't the most ideal situation, but it was definitely a way to get started. So I did that for, gosh, a year and a half. before I did a GoFundMe and raised some money to start accumulating equipment and opening my own shop, or not opening my own shop, but getting my own shop put together so that I was able to make knives on my own without kind of taking that 50% hit. That was the arrangement with Dave. But in that time, I was able to develop relationship with some makers that I had met before, and so got to know a bit better, like especially like Bill Burke and the DeRosiers and other people in the knife making community. Lorian Arnold is a knife. He's been getting into knife making the last few years, as well as been knife designing. He actually has a knife design out right now with Boker. So he designs really great folders, as well as fixed blades. He's done some fixed blade knives with Nathan Carruthers, um, and actually with Dan Keffler, who is I don't know if he's the current world champion knife cutting competition guy, but he has held that title for many years, over the past decade or so. Anyways, and so getting more involved with the knife making community, starting to go to shows. I went to my first show in Seattle, which unfortunately I wish I had gone to my first show in Eugene, Oregon. There's the Oregon Knife Collectors Association down there, and they give an award for best new maker, which is a maker who has never presented their work at a show before. And I went there. Let's see, the Seattle International Knife Show was the first show I did, which was in late April. And the Eugene show was like just before that, like a few weeks before that. And if I had known, I would have taken some work and probably would have won that best new maker award. But I did not know. So, say lovey. Anyways, so I started developing a reputation. I'm starting to put my style into work. As far as I'm aware, I'm either one of the first or the first maker to do the high belly on a chef's knife. So most handles typically were always right in the middle of the length of the handle, be right in the middle of the length. And so from my experience of working in restaurants and in production environment, typically we're working in a pinch grip. So I'm like, well, if I'm typically holding the knife in the pinch grip, why wouldn't the mass, or the thickest part of the handle, the belly, be a little bit higher up towards that blade to handle transition, so that it's still in the palm of my hand while holding the knife in the pinch grip? And I'm trying to think about ergonomics, not only ergonomics, but also trying to figure out ways to distinguish my work from all the other work that's out there. And so that was one of the ways early on that I distinguished my work from other people's work. And again, as far as I recall, nobody else was doing that. I was just going to look up. Let's see. A maker, Raider blade. There he is, Michael Raider. Because I know he does that now, but I don't know if that's always been his thing. Michael Raider, if you aren't aware, is a very talented maker. He's also based, at least last I knew, he was based out of Washington. He might be somewhere else nowadays. Yeah, Michael was, especially when I started, he was doing his handles where the belly was in the middle of the handle. And so for me, well, let's see. I guess his is slightly forward, but just the bare, like the slightest bit. Anyways, it was a way for me to make my work stand apart from other makers' work, as well as the angled bolster. So everybody was doing bolsters at like perpendicular to the spine. Again, trying to make my work stand apart, I was like, all right, I'm going to do an angle bolster, because that, again, talking about pinch grip ergonomics, that is how the hand is on. I don't have a knife, but that is how the hand is holding the knife. It's at the index finger is at a slight angle. If this is the spine of the knife, the finger is at a backward angle towards the handle. Um, and trying to build ergonomics into the chef's knife that support the way the hand is actually holding the knife. And so doing the angled bolster was another one that I started. So I think the high belly, I might not have been the first to do that. Mike, I think in his, I'm also looking at his early Instagram posts, and he was doing that early on, but I can't remember the exact timeline on things, but I was one of the first. And so the angle bolster, as far as I'm aware, I'm definitely the first. And so making chef's knives, and selling them through Blade Gallery. I think the kite shape or the shield shape is another one that is the hexagonal handle. Again, as far as I'm aware, I'm one of the first, if not the first, to start doing that handle. Um, and part of the reason I'm doing this again is to distinguish my work from other people's work. A lot of people, I get the question all the time, like, how do I make my work stand apart? And really, when it comes to the blade, there are some severe limitations when it comes to blade profile. You don't want to get too crazy with the blade profile, because it still has to function as a tool. At least in my mind, when it comes to knife designs, you can fuck off and do weird pattern or weird blade profiles and shapes, and maybe that's more of an art piece and good for you. But for me, when I'm making a knife, I'm really, my goal first is to make a tool. And so it is really important that that profile suits the work that it's supposed to be doing. And then you can kind of futz with it here and there. Um, my friend Don Andrade, Don Carlos Andrade, California Custom Knives, um, he plays with the profiles, but he plays with them in a meaningful way. And I really, really like what he does. And I look at the knife, and it is unique to his style, but it still has a functional profile, especially to the cutting edge, um, that suits the knife well for being a functional tool. And I think that is a really important thing to keep in mind. So, um, yeah, so a lot of the stuff that I've done over the years has been to really try to distinguish myself not only from other make like from Bob and other influences. Like I didn't want people to think my work was a copy of Bob's work or Dave Lish's work or Michael Rader's work, because at the time there were very few chef's knife makers doing integrals. There was Mike Rader, there was Bill Burke, I think there was Dave Lish, and I don't really know if there were really any others. There might have been. I'm there. I feel like there have to have been. I know down in Central America and Brazil, Mike, um, the knife makers down there were doing the gaucho knives, which are very, very similar looking to culinary knives, to integral culinary knives, and they've been doing those for fucking years. Um, but functionally, they are not the same as culinary knives, because they are outdoor knives. They're hard use knives. The blade geometry is very different, to what a functional chef's knife would be. So trying to use Damascus patterns. So I always had kind of a thing for patterns, and I was still designing patterns. And while I was working in Dave's shop, I was somewhat limited to what I would do, because uh, failed failing at getting patterns to weld properly, especially mosaics, and especially when you're new to it, is the thing that happens. I was making mosaics when I worked for Bob, but we were doing it where we were wrapping all the pieces in sacrificial material, so they were always kind of protected and secure and able to weld up quite nicely with with very little concern. It was a lot of work to grind the sacrificial material off, but the patterns we were making were great. Um, and and so that is, I mean, doing that is a very viable way. Canning tiled mosaics is definitely a viable way of getting steel to stick together properly. It is just a lot more involved in the setup. It's a lot more involved in the cleanup, and then um, but after you get it out, you can either do some forging or limited forging. I mean, excuse me, forging the profile. But especially when it comes to angle tiles, which we've talked before on previous Q and A's, they have their own bag of potential issues down the road. Um, so, anyways, so when I was working out at Dave's shop, I did somewhat basic patterns. I was doing random patterns. I was doing ladder patterns. I didn't do any raindrop patterns. I was doing like laddered W's and laddered explosions. Um, I started doing a little bit of mosaic stuff, but I was made to stop doing that because of the potential risk of failure. Um, and so I didn't really get to, in that year and a half, I didn't really get to explore my mosaic stuff very much. But I did once I got that money put together and started. And so with the money from the crowdfunding project, as well as some private loans from family, I was able to get the equipment um, put together so that I could start my own shop and also not only be making more money from the work I was doing, but also having a lot more freedom to explore mosaic patterns. And I will say, I did, especially when I started dabbling in mosaics more, I was experiencing a lot of failures. And that's a lot of time lost, a lot of time, not a lot of material, but so many consumables are involved with the whole um, mosaic making process um that yeah, it was something I had to actually, like, I had to, what is it, I had to, trying to think of the right word, yeah, I just had to take it slow. So while I was doing things that I knew would sell because they were secure, because they were ladder patterns or random patterns and stuff like that, in between, from time to time, I was doing some mosaic stuff, and I started to figure out my current approach to mosaics, which is the compress and stretch, or my micro billet approach, um, which is where I'm basically making I'm doing a cut and restack like you normally would to multiply either pattern elements or layers and stuff like that, but I'm only doing enough for one blade rather than doing a whole billet. And and so making those micro billets has been a really a kind of a game changer in my approach. And then I got to the point where I was like, because so many makers, I think when I first started out, some hard lessons learned was that I definitely overextended myself, um, especially when it came to, because when I was first starting and I was hanging out with more experienced makers, a lot of them were like, somebody might order a 240 millimeter or 9.5-inch chef's knife, but it, what were they saying? They would fudge it to within a quarter of an inch either direction, plus or minus. And all I could think is like, don't they have enough skill to just nail it right on the head? I don't understand why they're doing this. And it so my thought was like, well, I'm gonna be the maker that just that gives the customer all the options. They can um they can name the specific pattern because I'm very good at, even at that time, I was very good at reading patterns. Um, Especially when it came to mosaics, especially mosaics that I had made. So they can tell me the pattern, tell me the length, tell me the height of the heel, blade profile, handle style, handle size, all this stuff, and I'll give them all these options. It's going to be awesome. The problem is that it wasn't awesome. It I think it's possible for somebody to do, but it's also a lot of work to keep up with, especially if even the smallest thing, you're finished grinding the blade and you accidentally burn up the tip and you're already at the exact length. Guess what? You're under now. Do you start now? It's time to start over. Um, or at least set that piece aside because that no longer works for that order. So I think, yeah, early on, I really overextended myself and I was taking a bunch of custom orders because at the time, that seemed like that was the model, and the more custom orders you had, the more of a backlog that you had, that represented, success, and you were doing well, and you had that demand, and to be able to say, oh, I have a 3-year backlog, makes other people go, oh, but at the same time, it was fucking stressful. It was really stressful, and actually sometimes if I think too hard about it and reflect on it, I I have anxiety start to build back up inside of me, thinking about how much stress I was experiencing. Um, and so, thankfully, eventually, a few years ago, we finally changed the model to where I'm not doing custom orders. I have email lists. I make great, cool knives, and then I get them out to the email list, and that helps take a lot of the pressure off because, especially over the years, whatever, 14 years basically, um, I feel very confident in my ability to understand what people are interested in looking for. So, anyways, started my shop, started experimenting more with mosaics. That was another thing too. I was like, I'll be the guy that only makes mosaics. There's no other maker that just does mosaics, and so all my stuff is going to be super flashy and super cool and like really unique and ornate. But the reality is, like, a lot of the patterns that we make as makers, the people that are really appreciating them are other makers, and other makers are not our customers. It is great to have that pat on the back or that pat on the head or whatever you want to refer to it as, but um, when it comes to most of our customers, very few of them truly understand what's going into those patterns. I think there are definitely customers who are deeply interested in understanding and appreciating the technique and skill that go into making those patterns. I think that's part of the reason people buy our handmade knives in the first place. So I don't think it's a write-off, but I do hope that makers, experienced and new, who are listening to this will understand that, most of the time we're doing it to stroke our own ego or get praise from other makers, but for the most part, our customers are somewhat indifferent to the patterns. But it's not a hard and fast rule. That is a severe overgeneralization. But anyways, so over the years, I've continued to try to innovate to continue to stand out again. So, I'm getting that kind of, I've always been approval seeking, and it's taken me many years to realize that. Um, but through talk therapy, I think that's definitely been one thing that I've come to identify as a characteristic of mine is seeking the approval of others constantly, almost constantly. Um, um, but also, um, what was I going to say? Also just trying to push boundaries, honestly. And I think, what was it? I was listening to a podcast called I Love Marketing. And I think, and at the same time, and this is like back in 2015, 2016, I was also listening and watching Gary V, who is known as a social media guru, um, and nowadays, but at the time he was just kind of starting out in a way. He had a couple books out, I think, at that point, but he still was not very widely known. But especially through the podcast, the I Love Marketing podcast, the guy had a vacuum business. Um, but he his approach to marketing was telling people what he's doing. And over when I was going to shows, um, really like God, the first I mean, really, I think it was the last show or last couple shows that I went to that I didn't have people questioning why the work was so expensive simply because they're or quote unquote simply because they're culinary knives. Like, aren't those just cooking knives? But in early shows, I kept coming up against these conversations and struggling not to feel adversarial against these people who were just really honestly, they just didn't know, and they didn't understand that the amount of work that goes into making culinary knives is just as much as goes into the fancy Bowie knives, hunting knives, that get higher, or at the time were more highly revered, especially by collectors. Um, and so it was through the I guess the modeling from the I Love Marketing podcast and Gary V that I started to share my process so that potential customers, because in my mind I was like, okay, people seeing me at these shows, they just don't understand how much work goes into this. So I'm going to start showing them. And so I started posting about all the different aspects and all the different processes because I was trying to head off those conversations because I hated, like, I really struggle with not getting on the defensive. Like, when people were like, why is that so expensive? Or why this or why that? And blah, blah, blah. And so I started showing people, and so I started having, actually, so more and more people were finding me. Um, Potential customers were sharing my content with each other because really nobody was really kind of like educating at that point, trying to educate their customer base. And so um, through trying to educate my customer base, I was growing my customer base, and cutting off those conversations, or yeah, cutting off those conversations so that when people would meet me in real life at shows, it was less about the conversation about the price, but really more than anything about whether or not they personally could afford it or not. But when they saw the work, they understood. People were starting to understand. They understood how much work went into making the pattern, all the work in preparing and designing and making the pattern, forging the blade, and grinding the blade, all the heat treat stuff, all the everything, all the various aspects, handle sculpting, handle assembly, all that to create these works of art. What makes also trying to educate people on what makes a quality culinary knife, quality high performance culinary knife versus the commercially manufactured stuff that most people are used to and familiar with. Um, and so, but the and so there was I was finding success in cutting off, or like heading off those conversations by showing people through my social media, especially through Instagram and Facebook. And so something that, especially from the I Love Marketing podcast, that and other books that I had started reading about marketing and branding, especially from Seth Godin, is a really great resource. Is that it's also about through being kind of being vulnerable in a way, and sharing aspects of the process. I am building trust and rapport with my potential customers, and whether or not they can afford it or not, I've become a resource to them. And if they happen to know somebody who is in the position to spend that kind of money for a piece of art or a piece of a custom made knife, they the who's going to be top of mind is going to be the person who has been the trusted resource for them. And honestly, that has been the reality for all kinds of different brands. And that was something that I discovered, and it really was really helpful. And but something else that was happening that I didn't anticipate is that my posts not only were helping to educate my customers, they were helping to educate other knife makers. And whether it was my process for building a saya or sculpting a handle, or as I started to do the pattern welded Wednesdays, how I developed my patterns, how I, developing the S grind. Like I was one of, it was it was my friend chef, sushi chef down in Eugene, Oregon, Taro Kobayashi, who encouraged me to try to figure out this S grind, as it was being called in the kitchen knife forums. Forums were, for those who aren't aware, forums are like social media, like Facebook, Instagram. They're platforms, but they are topical. And there was a forum called the Kitchen Knife Forums where people talked kitchen knives. There are other forums also called on the same subjects or various subjects. There's blade forums, which is very general. There's the blacksmith, or what is it? Yeah, blade forums, blade smith forums. I think the American Bladesmith Society also has their own forum. And then each of the forums kind of break down into various categories, kind of like Discord, or pretty similar to Discord, honestly. Except for Discord has long running threads versus that are, well, I guess forums are also searchable. But anyways, forums are old school. Basically social media before there was social media, and back in the days of chat rooms and forums. But anyways, people were calling this particular grind an S grind, which is essentially a hollow over the top, or like up inside the blade above a convex grind typically. And at the time, I think there was a maker named Marko Sorkin. There was Robin Dallman. And they were doing it back in like 2011 or 12 or 13. I think Robin's stuff was, as far back as I could see, was back in 2013, but it could be further back than that. So they were makers doing the S grind to a level, and then Taro informed or encouraged me and my buddy Ian Rogers both to pursue the S grind, because he owned both of our work and liked our work and saw the S grind as a strong potential. And it was, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember who the maker was from Japan, who, whether they were doing it intentionally or not, there was an S grind in their blades. But I can't remember who that maker is. I'm sorry. I'm just like spacing. I think it started with a Y. I don't know. Hopefully it'll come to mind. But knowing my brain, it probably won't. Anyways, so so I started pursuing the S grind. And I'd seen some videos on how Japanese knife makers grind blades. And so my assumption is that if they were going to make an S grind, they would probably be using the wheels they already have. What are the sizes of those wheels? So then I made my own platen that reflected that size of a wheel. And I started doing S grinds actually back in, I think it was 2015 is when I first did an S grind. Maybe 2014, 15, somewhere in there. I was doing S grinds. Up to that point, I was doing convex grinds. Unfortunately, flat grinds, when it comes to culinary knives, especially chef's knives or tall knives of any kind, if it's a slicer or a paring knife or utility slicer or utility knife, um, a boning knife, a convex grind is not necessary. But when it comes, or anything other than a flat grind isn't really too necessary. But when it comes to a chef's knife or a santoku or gyudo, you want to have some sort of non-flat grind, which at the very basic level would be a convex grind. And and that's simply for performance and easing the release of the blade from food and so on and so forth. Compound grinds or S grinds or B grinds or J grinds, like there's all kinds of crazy grinds these days. And I think a lot of that stems from early uh, popularization, I think, of the S grind from my work and Ian Rogers' work, especially through social media. We were the two guys doing it, and then we started showing people how to do it. I think I showed, I did a thing with Alex Steele where he called me and I did a demonstration and I talked to him, and so he started showing it on his YouTube page, and then a lot of people started doing it from there. And so now an S grind is a pretty standard grind for a lot of makers these days. But even, gosh, 10 years ago, that was not a thing. It was not a thing at all. um, and then I started doing, let's see, so mosaics, S grind, and then I started playing with coffee. I think coffee was the next thing, and that was in 2014 or 15. I'm actually going to pull, actually I have a few pictures to get us caught up. So I'm going to dig through before we get to the coffee. So this is a picture of me with Bob when we first, and this is for people, if you want to see this, you can go to the YouTube channel. You can see this conversation, and you can see the pictures that I'm showing here. This is, I don't know where we're at time-wise. Oh, we're about 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Or sorry, 2 hours and 30 minutes and 30 seconds. Okay, it's me and Bob Kramer standing in front of our, in front of Bob's Little Giant, which I believe he sold recently. And then, gosh, I don't have any pictures of my early work while I still worked for Bob. I know I have them somewhere, but anyways, this is a pattern when I went to go do some work at a little hammering in Idaho at Bill Burke's shop. This is a crazy pattern that I really would love to replicate because it ended up coming out so good. And I never ended up doing anything with this pattern. I think I think what I ended up doing, and I don't even have a name. I don't think I really have a name for this pattern. I tried making this pattern, or what I ended up trying. This was just a cutoff. I tried tiling this pattern, and I think it failed, sadly. And so I don't know if I just trashed it or it's somewhere in a bucket, but the material never ended up sticking together properly, and so I never ended up doing anything with it. But this is a perfect example of how you can play with line quality, is what I'm going to call it, because that's what I remember my art teachers referring to, the varying thicknesses and thinness and curvaceousness and stuff like that of various lines. And this has a combination of like thick black lines and thick silver lines and alternating, and then really thin ones, and then bold black through the middle. And then I believe in this particular pattern, in the initial billet, it was mirrored across the center line. What that was exactly, I don't know, but the effect in this cutoff is fucking awesome. And I always try to encourage people to play with the thickness of their lines, because often people will just do one black, one silver, one black, one silver, one black, one silver, one black, one silver. And depending on the pattern you're trying to develop, If it's a random pattern or something more regimented, that might be the way to go. But especially when it comes to mosaics, and honestly, even random patterns, playing with the thickness of the various colored lines will create a lot more interesting activity and movement and line quality that in the finished piece will create more draw and make people want to come in close to have a closer look at the piece. So that Damascus was one of those pieces. I'm trying to see. This is after my first time at the Eugene show. I ended up winning best Damascus chef or Damascus knife and the best of show at that knife show. I think this is the second time I was at the second Seattle International Knife Show. This was the first time I met Jason Knight. He was just kind of cruising around at that show, but it was the first time I met him. It's a good dude. Trying to see what other. Gosh, I can't remember. I'm having a hard time seeing some of these pictures that I have in here. Okay, so I guess at this point, I can go. Oh, you know what? I do have a photo of the first chef's knife I made. So this was a this is that piece that David Lish had. It was actually a collaboration because you can see on this side his maker's markers on the right hand side of the blade, and mine must be on the left hand side. But he had this blade already forged out. It was an integral chef, and then I did all the work to it. So I did the finish grinding, I did the profiling, finish grinding, handle sculpting, handle attaching, all that kind of stuff. This is the first time my high-bellied Western was I used that in a handle. And actually this handle material, which is hilarious, this was kind of a throwaway piece of handle material to Dave. He didn't really like it. And I was like, I like it a lot. I loved that it was super black at the bolster transition with the heartwood, that transition into sapwood, this beautiful blonde sapwood, and it just adds that much more character, that particular piece. But yeah, this was my first integral chef's knife that was made in collaboration with David Lish. And then I can't remember what my first one was after that. Obviously I've been on a tear since, but I've made many down the road. Let's see, these knives, these are really early knives too. So I was working in Seattle and I was working on getting my own space put together, but I still didn't have my own shop space. I didn't have a shop space where I could have all my tools and equipment. I had a grinder and I had tools available to me. I had a friend that had a heat treat or a oxyacetylene torch with a rosebud tip. So these knives are actually, I believe they're made out of, I want to say that they're 5160, but I cannot remember. But I torch heat treated them, and then they have copper bolsters or guards, bolsters, whatever, that transitions into the handles. One has redwood handle, so it's an 8-inch and a 6-inch, I believe. And then the other has I think this wood is called Sindarin wood, which is actually, apparently it's a protected wood. I can't remember where I bought it, but I think technically it's not supposed to be used on stuff. But this was a long time ago, and I have no idea. Oh, actually, technically, I do know where this knife is. But anyways, I didn't know it at the time. Sorry, China. Anyways, that was some of my early stuff. And then, so when it comes to coffee, I'm going to pop up these knives real quick. These knives are the first knives I ever did a coffee treatment on. And it was using my Dragonfire mosaic pattern. Again, you can see I was playing with the line quality. So I have a combination of thick black lines and thick silver lines and thin black lines and thin silver lines. and it creates a very interesting visual effect down the blade. Um, I have another picture that it will give us a closer look. You can get in there, you can see that contrast. And this was actually a polished finish. And this actually was a custom order that went to a maker down in Colorado. I think he was in Boulder at the time. But anyways, the coffee was kind of like my next thing that I was building on it. I didn't invent it, but I innovated on the process, and the fact that I kind of standardized a process for doing it. I first learned about it from Adam and Haley DeRogers, and it was actually Adam DeRogers and Mike Dybert were visiting Dave's shop when I was still working out of Seattle, and I happened to be there when those guys were there working, and they came over and while I was doing some forging, and we are just talking knives and talking about figuring out contrast. And Adam had brought up that makers in the UK were using instant coffee, and I was like, instant coffee? And he's like, yeah, they're using instant coffee to darken parts that God, what was he saying? Oh, that were hard to get to, especially um like the integral bolsters that have like ball features or tight little nooks and crannies and stuff that are hard to get into. And so they're using instant coffee. And but I never got any info. And I think partly because I don't think he just said strong coffee. I don't think he knew any exact measurements, ratios, temperatures, times, any of that stuff. And he made it sound like, yeah, you just mix up some hot coffee and then you dip the blade in it and it comes out in high contrast, or those areas that are hard to get to come out high contrast. That way you don't have to sand on them or anything like that. And so I didn't really do anything with it for a while, or with that little tidbit of information. And it was probably about 6 months later that I did a coffee finish on a knife. And it came out fucking like perfect the first time. And I was like, wow, that is really easy. This is great. And that piece, I actually don't think I have the picture of it here, but that piece, I buffed it out, and so it had this beautiful high contrast, really bright silver and dark 1080 material in the Damascus, and I think it was just a random Damascus, and I think it actually was on my first what Japanese cowboy handle. Um, but anyways, um, I I I then used it on a piece that I was taking, these pieces that I ended up taking to the show just for show, just to demonstrate. Um, and People loved it. They thought it looked really great, and they were trying to. They're like, "What was that? What is that? How did you do that?" And I told them it was instant coffee. I did an instant coffee treatment on them, and but unfortunately, to get that instant coffee on those two knives was a fucking nightmare. I had to redo that finish multiple times, and I think part of the reasons it was particularly difficult was that those knives, um, they don't have any sort of spacer material. It just goes straight from the steel into the wood. And if you have a takedown knife, that's great. That's not a problem. You can take it apart, etch the blade separate from the handle, and then do a final glue up and clean everything up. I did not do that. These handles were fixed to the blade, glued in place, and I was struggling to get a finish on them. I finally did, but I realized that at that point that I have a lot of work to do to try to figure out a recipe for etching with coffee. And I futzed around and etched with coffee off and on, or honestly on most pieces, for about a year and a half. And I was saying coffee etch, coffee. This is a coffee etch. This is a coffee etch, and I did coffee etch. But again, I was still like the whole year and a half, I was really struggling to get consistent results. And finally, I was getting to a place where I was getting more consistent results. And so that's when I first started talking about the instant coffee process, and which is kind of the foundation of what anybody, especially in the United States, is doing these days with instant coffee. Um, and I've definitely made, and again, if you go to past Q&A, we talk about, I think, Damascus finishing, coffee etching, and I go much more into depth about my current process. But yeah, I've gone through many iterations. I'm occasionally experimenting with it, but I've come up with a pretty solid process that is incredibly consistent, um, and yields really great results. So I'm kind of sticking with that. I will say coffee does not work for stainless steel. It struggles with high chromium steels like 5200 or CPM, or sorry, not CPM, but Crew Forge V. So if you're finding that your instant coffee isn't darkening things, it's probably the steel that you're using. Um, it'll work great on simple high carbon steels like 1075, 1080, 1084, 1085, 1095. Um, and I think 80 CRV2, it works really good. There are a few others that I've used it on, and it gets the material like jet black. It's awesome. But um, there are definitely some steels that it doesn't play with, and if you're struggling with it, look at the chemistry of that steel and try to determine if there might be something going on in the chemistry, especially chromium, that is making it not play very nicely. Because again, I've found with especially 52100, Crew Forge V, anything with high chromium content, it doesn't want to darken very nicely. And that's when, instead of doing the coffee, then I will go to a ferric etch, and I'll approach it the same as I do my coffee, but I'll just finish in my weak ferric. And I typically do a weak ferric because I find that it messes with the 15 and 20 a lot less, if even at all, before getting the steel, the 1080 material, the dark material, to a nice dark black. So okay, so coffee etching was a thing. Another thing that I innovated on and added to the world. And again, I share these things because I want the work is hard enough as it is. I think a lot of people are like, give pushback because they're like, you're giving away all their secrets. And I'm like, they still have to do all the work. It is still a lot of work, and it's hard work, and it's not always glamorous and glorious and fun. So, or as Jeff Fader would say, not always lightning bolts and high fives, or high fives and lightning bolts. I can't remember. Anyways, and so after that, I've done a lot of sharing with the Pattern Welded Wednesday. I think it was after coffee that I started doing the Pattern Welded Wednesdays. I did Forged in Fire. Actually, that Dragon's Fire mosaic, I had one more chunk that I hadn't forged into anything yet, and I was getting ready to do, and I did the first rounds of Forged in Fire, and so I was competing with my friends here, especially Josh Smith on Forged in Fire, and it was when I came back for the second round. We brought their swords back. I brought Josh that extra piece of Dragonfire. I guess I asked him whatever happened of it, because I thought it would be fun for us to do collaboration. I made the steel, he forges the blade out of it, and he was still working his lineman job, so he was really slow in the knife making side of things. But I think he told me that he ended up accidentally forging it out the wrong direction and fucked up the pattern. So that was a whole blade gone, sadly, but that's the way things go sometimes. It's just what it is. So being on Forged in Fire, both in, I think my first episode aired in 2015, and then the second episode I was on aired in 2018. For anybody that hasn't seen them, I was in season 1 on season 1, episode 7, the Roman Gladius. And then I was asked to be back as a judge's pick Doug Marcotte brought me back as his champion for the episode, and which was season 4, episode 1, and that was actually the first season or first time that Neil Kamimura appeared in Forged in Fire, and became the amazing friend that I'm fortunate to have, as well as knife making sensation, who was just recently featured actually in the Jason Momoa kind of docu-series called On the Roam. And so it's Jason Momoa is cruising around and featuring, doing kind of like these vignettes and featurettes on various makers and creators of things that he's met over the years and developed relationships with. And Neil's one of those people. I've been, like I said, I'm very fortunate to work with Neil. I first went out to Hawaii and taught him how my approach to making Damascus. And then over the years, we just become great buds. And I'm showing a picture right now, actually, of me and Neil working together. And then over the years, again, I've met other great people through him, like Zach Brown, and done work with a lot of really, I've been fortunate to meet and make knives for a lot of really talented people, and work with some really great people too, like my buddy here, Andy Wozniak. I went to LA and did some work with Adam Perry Lang, chef down there. Jimmy Kimmel actually owns one of my knives. Thanks to that connection with Adam, I built a knife for Andrew Zimmern, who is best known for Bizarre Foods. But he has all kinds of shows now. But I have a picture up here. It's kind of a collage of various pictures of the knife I built for him and him using it and his content. Let's see what else I got here. Jason. I've been featured in a couple articles, both in what was that one? I don't know. Well, anyways, the Michelin Guide here. And then also in Vogue magazine in an article. Yeah, it's been kind of a trip cruising around doing this work and meeting these people, and again, this knife making has really created an opportunity for me to connect with people that I never would have met otherwise. I'm here with legend Don Fogg at the New England School of Metalwork. At this point, when I met him, I was taking a class, introduction to bladesmithing class, and at that point I'd actually already been forging blades for like 2 years, and so I was very familiar with knife making. And so, but I was on the path of trying to pursue getting my journeyman smith, ABS journeyman smith, American Bladesmith Society. And so I wanted to take the class to shave off a year, and I never ended up going through in a test. But it turns out I was talking to Steve Culver a few months back, and I think he sounds confident that class still holds up. So if I sign back up for the ABS, which I'm actually supposed to be doing this year, sometime before Blade Show, sign up for the ABS, then I will, that will still count towards it, and I can test for my journeyman smith in a couple of years, which I feel very confident in being able to accomplish, but it still is going to be stressful, I'm sure, and a lot of work. So I look forward to doing that, though. And I'm just trying to look through some of these pictures, other pictures I have. Okay, so just so to kind of get back to my story, I just, over the years, since so Pattern Wheel Wednesdays, instant coffee, and more than anything, I just keep trying to push things for myself, honestly, really more than anything these days, because I have been doing it for 14 years. Is that what I came up with? Yeah, 14 years, or going on 14 years. I think technically it'll be 14 years in June. But I'll have done this work for such a long time, and it's Like I said before, I struggled with custom orders and burnout and stress from custom orders. And a lot of that, honestly, was me over promising. Sadly, this is not something I'm proud to admit, but over promising and under delivering, honestly, more than anything. Because something I was not taking into consideration when you take custom orders and when you say you're going to deliver a very specific thing is that mistakes happen, and they actually happen quite a lot. And um, if you are playing too close to the margin of error, like the example I gave earlier before, the knife is at the exact length it needs to be. Say I profiled it. Now I'm working on the finish grinding, and then I accidentally burn off the heel or the tip or something like that, and I got to grind it back. Now that knife is too short. That is not what the customer ordered. And mistakes like that, mistakes with handles, mistakes with whatever, with patterns not being exactly either what I had in mind or what the customer wanted had in mind for what they were looking for. Um, it was a lot of mistakes and a lot of stress piling onto my shoulders because I was taking that on and being very hard on myself. Honestly, I really I've, again, with thanks to therapy over the last couple of years, I've come to the realization that I am incredibly hard on myself because I have this issue with perfectionism and feeling like if it's not perfect, then it's trash. I'm trash, and it's not worth having in the world. When the reality is nothing is perfect, and that we need to celebrate as best we can, even the small victories, um, and create space for ourselves when we do make mistakes, because mistakes are part of the process of making and creating anything. That um, it, a mistake is only truly a mistake if you don't learn from it. If you leave it and learn nothing from the mistake, then it stays a mistake. But if you learn from it and you grow from it, it becomes a lesson. That mistake is no longer a mistake. That is a lesson learned. And it doesn't have to be chalked up under the mistakes, pile of mistakes. Um, So I have a pile of lessons that I've learned over the years, um, which is actually part of the reason I've become so good at reading and developing patterns and reverse engineering patterns, is because I've made a lot of mistakes in developing patterns, but then trying to understand what mistake I made or what route, what happened to the material, what route did it go through that caused that mistake to be made, and then by learning from that, adding that accidental process or accidental whatever to my repertoire of skills and knowledge. Now again, that mistake is no longer a mistake. It has become a lesson in my journey and my process. And I hope anybody listening to this will, if they struggle with being hard on themselves, being their own worst critics, which I have my entire life, through anything, not just knife making, and it just whatever, everything and anything and everything that I've ever done. Um, Try to take it easier on yourself, um, because we are anti-fragile. This is a new phrase that I've learned recently, and it is the best way to try to understand how the human grows and develops as a being and in this world, and how we interact with our world, and that is um, through making mistakes, falling off skateboards, or you know, little kids spilling glass cups of juice and shit like that. Like, all kinds of things contribute to us learning. It can it's all about learning from the mistakes, really, more than anything. And I don't know why I got on that, but anyways, it's really important to be good to ourselves and take it easy on ourselves and understanding. And even if, it seems like something shouldn't be forgiven, there's really, like, what benefit comes from being so hard on ourselves that we can't forgive ourselves, or even sometimes other people for mistakes made, when there's an opportunity to learn from them. So um, where I'm at now, I've stopped taking custom orders because I was overextending myself and things got way out of hand and way too stressful. Um, if I were to do things again, I would probably still do custom orders, but I would be a lot more fluid with the delivery times, because that was the other thing. I was promising delivery times that ended up getting backed up years and years. Honestly, it was too much, and all of eh, that on top of me being my own worst self-critic and or my own worst critic, and being so hard on myself, it was just so much shit piled on me that I was hitting a breaking point that was not good for anybody. And so the solution was to transition the way we operate the business. And so, and when I say we, I'm referring to myself and um, my wife who has encouraged me the whole time. Um, well, I guess not when I was working for Bob, but my whole time on my own as Maumasi Fire Arts. Um, she was the one that really pushed me to pursue it, because she could see that it was the thing. It was my calling, kind of, in a way. And so anybody who is thankful for anything that I've done or shared or whatever has her to also thank for, because if it wasn't for her, I would not be here. It would be very unlikely that I'd be here talking to you. I'm gonna pop up a quick picture. This is a picture of the gala. I was going for like an old west mustache and goatee kind of look. I look like I just need a cowboy hat and I belong in an old western. But this is my beautiful wife, Sarah. She is kind of the driver behind the success of a lot of what's been going on in the knife in the Maumasi Fire Arts, and she's a person customers used to interact with. Um, Now that we don't really have a lot of custom orders, nobody's really working with her, but she helps with the Patreon side of things, and and managing things there. Um, and yeah, and if it wasn't her for her be in a tough spot. I'm trying to think. I think I have another picture of her and I. This is when we were first started dating. I thought this would be a fun one to share. We painted each other's faces as skeletons. So she is painted up as a skeleton, and so am I. We're dressed up very nicely. So we're dapper skeletons out for Halloween. Anyways, I thought that would be a fun one to share. Anyways, trying to think. Where I'm at now is that I'm still, I started this Patreon 2 years ago, and part of the reason I wanted to do, since Greg couldn't be here today, instead of canceling the interview, doing kind of a self interview and telling my story, is it's because I haven't done it, and I haven't really gone into depth about, especially like the things that happened with Bob and kind of how I've gotten to where I'm at now. And this is an opportunity to really do that. And so I guess usually when I'm talking to somebody, I'm like, all right, what are you working on now? And what are some projects and what are you looking forward to doing in the future? And so right now, I've started, part of the change that I made to the business was from doing custom orders was to do more teaching and educating, because again, I can share through my Patreon and I can share through social media some things, but it's not the same as in-person coaching and working together. I have been fortunate to work with a few people like my buddy Neil Kamimura and my friend Rick Hall and my friend Gabe Fletcher, who's one of our super sponsors here in the Patreon. And I have more private lessons. My friend John Lewis, I just did a private lesson with last fall. He's another chef's knife maker. It's been really incredible to work with these people directly and teach classes and seminars and see people turn around, like Dan Hubbs. of 6/6 mountain knives, turn around and use that information and knowledge that they're gaining from those experiences and being able to incorporate it immediately into their development and their path and their growth as makers and creators of these bespoke, heirloom quality handcrafted tools, knives, and art pieces. And so I have a lot of teaching coming up this year. The most relevant ones, let's see, I'm going to be, at least like right now, live as this is recording, I'm going to be in Arizona. I'm doing demonstrations down at the Travis Woods Hammer Inn. And then I'm teaching at the Desert Metal Craft School. And then after that, March, April. Then I'm going to be doing a private lesson in April. And then April, May, nothing in May, I don't think. June, June, I'm going to be at Blade Show. So if anybody's interested in connecting, that'd be a great place to do it. And then I'm going to be over in Ireland. So if there's any makers over in Europe or the UK who are interested in doing a class, I'm going to be over working with Fingal Ferguson. But we're talking about teaching a class over there, probably doing more seminar work around Damascus, pattern development, and stuff like that. And then I'm going to be in Italy right after that, working with Oliver Goldschmidt, but also talking about doing a class there and talking about Damascus making Damascus designs, understanding how material moves, and reverse engineering patterns and pattern planning. And then that's June, or that takes me to July. And then later in July, I'm actually going to be in Indiana at the Coal Iron Works school, and I'm going to be doing my Damascus theory classes there. So it used to be one class, but it was a lot to try to fit in a short period of time. And so I've now broken it down into 2 separate classes. And so just that way we can really dive deep and really get into everything we need to for the various subjects taught in the various in the 2 different classes. So one's going to be one is focused on how material moves, and then reverse engineering and pattern development. And then the second class is going to be more about unique forging techniques that I'm using to develop some of my patterns and create movement, and how I'm getting material welded, as well as using mathematics to develop patterns and create unique and unusual patterns in Damascus. And so that's in July. And then August, September, October, I'm going to be at Maker Camp again, and potentially following Maker Camp with something, since that's down the road a little ways. But that's probably going to be the year right there. So in between, I'm going to be just doing my normal knife stuff. If you are not part of the Patreon, getting in the Patreon, doing more work in the Patreon to share techniques and processes, making the content I've really struggled with, but to help basically be personal coaches with people through the Discord and through our Q&A sessions that we do in the Patreon has been really helpful, I think, for a lot of people. Let's see. So projects I have going on right now. I still have projects. So I've done some work to rediscover how particular patterns from ancient Rome were made. So I'm still working on developing those and forging those into swords. And that's going to be a longer term project. And I think somewhere down the road, I'll probably be offering a class about how to develop and make those patterns and steels, and hopefully getting some work into museums. I would love for that to happen. I also have some patterns called the chain patterns that are old gun barrel patterns that I've been working on developing and making. and refining techniques. And I actually discovered or came up with a new technique and process that I think creates a tidier, more controlled gun barrel, or not gun barrel, but a twist or chain pattern. But the trick is, yeah, getting things lined up perfectly. And I think part of the problem with this new technique is that it might be a little bit too refined, and if things are out of alignment, even the slightest bit, um, it kind of fucks up the pattern a little bit. So, what's nice about the old approach to the chain pattern is that there's a little bit of flexibility there more than anything. It's just it doesn't have to be perfectly in line for it to still have the chain effect that the makers were looking for. So, anyways, those are some of my passion projects that I got. Otherwise, I'm just building knives. I'm still constantly exploring different techniques and processes. I've been doing some more hand carving lately than I have ever, and so I'm excited to kind of continue exploring that and playing with that and try to maybe settle on a style and a technique. Um, but maybe not. I don't know. It's just more than anything, it's to help prevent burnout because I've you know, I've been doing this for a while and it's easy to get burned out. And if especially if you're doing the same thing over and over again. So it's a way for me to kind of mix things up. I'm trying to think what else. Mm, yeah, I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, stuff coming up. Oh, okay. So I have a lot of fixture ideas, things that I have done to either modify machines or fixtures I've created for myself for my process, knife making process. So what I want to do is start working on getting some of those made and out to people because I think that these are tools and modifications that can really be game changers for people when it comes to their knife making process. Um, these are technique or these are tools that I've designed that help with in regards to the idea of doing this for a long time. So some of the tools, especially, are great for either new makers, experienced makers, or fucking veteran makers who've been making knives for 50 years. And that's where I'm thinking, like, if I'm going to be still making, I'm like, I'll be 40 this year. If I'm going to still be making knives in 20 years, I know I'm not going to still be able to rely on steady hands or uh, like really great vision and stuff like that. And so I'm trying to develop tools now that I can use when I get there. Um, and so those are some of the things I hope I think people will get a lot of value out of some of these new things. And and the goal ideally is for them to like not break the bank because I'm not trying to break anybody's ass over any of this stuff. I really, again, it's about getting quality knowledge and skills and tools to people at reasonable prices so that they can try to pursue their passion, pursue their calling. And that's I'm all about trying to help people discover that for themselves. Um, trying to think. Oh yeah, I think another thing I want to start doing in the coming year is working on my pattern welded Wednesdays, pattern welded walkthroughs, but putting together illustrations that I can use in a book, to use in a book as well as educational content around the process and the technique for making the patterns, and then taking those patterns and forging them into blades using various techniques and processes. Um, and so doing educational content around that as well as making steel to sell. There are a lot of people out there making steel to sell. Um, I've really struggled, and it's actually filled me with a lot of anxiety and stress. If because just from my own experience, I'm not succeeding 100% of the time. Things don't always work out. Mistakes are made. And I would hate for something that I made and charged somebody for to be out there in the world, especially when it comes to steel, and say I make a bar of steel, they choose to forge it, and then something happens in the steel. Honestly, the likelihood that something went wrong was really, unless it's along a weld line somewhere, is probably on the in the user end of things. But I still have a hard time not taking ownership for that stuff. And maybe that's my own shit and I got to work through that. And honestly, maybe I should look at it like my chef's knives, you know. I send chef's knives out into the world and have been for 11 years. And even though I still feel anxious about the knives if something goes wrong with them. I feel a sense of responsibility for it. And so, but those have way more time and energy and effort put into them. So I should be able to do the same thing with steel. And so I want to start um, developing content around making patterns, make a thing from the pattern, make the knife, sell the knife, and then also then finish out the steel and sell the steel to people. So I think that's another thing that I want to start doing in the coming year. But again, at the same time, on knife making, teaching, uh, jigs and stuff, family life on top of all of that, and then the idea of possibly doing educational content is a lot. And I think depending on how this year goes, I might have overextended myself because I have, on top of the teaching engagements, I have a lot of other travel I'm doing as well, um, for myself personally, and so I might have overextended myself. We'll see. And so next year might be a slower year when it comes to teaching and whatnot. And maybe there's an on year and off year. Every other year I go out and go teaching and stuff. Um, or maybe I dial it way the fuck back and only teach once a quarter. Who knows? Anyways, I I really want to do. I've been wanting to do more educational content for a long time, and I think I've maybe have come up with an idea of how to make that work. But it would definitely involve getting other people involved who are more experienced in the content creation side of things, especially when it comes to the editing and whatnot. Um, because that is a whole business and entity unto itself outside of the knife making stuff that I have zero time for. So um but those are the things I got going on. Those are the things I got coming up. I appreciate all of you sticking with me through this 3 hours and 11 minute uh interview, or self interview, I guess, about me and telling my story to you. If you stuck through, I applaud you, because I'm sure it wasn't yeah, and this is me being hard on myself about things not being perfect, but I'm gonna cut that off. I just hope that it connected with people, and maybe not the whole thing, but aspects of it. And if anybody's got any questions, please feel free to reach out, hit me up. Um, especially if you're part of the Patreon, the Q&As are a perfect place to do the connecting about questions that you might have about things I've said in the podcast or things you've seen me do on social media. It's a great place for me to essentially be not your life coach, but I can be your knife coach. And for me to be in your corner and help you troubleshoot whatever you got going on. Again, I want to give a shout out to my super sponsors this month. We have Russell Tinsley of Oozlefinch Beers, at Oozlefinch Beers on Instagram, as well as at Can't Make Knives, which is his maker page. Dan Hubbs at 66, those are the numbers, 66 Mountain Knives. Lawrence Lake of Maritime Knife Supply, both on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, as well as maritimenifesupply.com. I actually just bought a shit ton of belts from them. Hopefully they're getting here in the next couple of days so I can get back to work. And then we have Gabe Fletcher, excuse me, of Anchorage Brewing, and as well as Anchorage Forge, where you can see his work and follow his journey. He is a great dude, and he's doing awesome work, and he is 100% worth a follow, because he is on a high trajectory. I don't know what the word is. He's on a serious trajectory. He's doing awesome stuff, and I'm really proud to be part of his journey and be his friend. And then next we have Eric Kidwell he's on Instagram at District 202 LLC. He's still getting his shop set up. He's been in the knife industry for a long time, but he's getting his shop set up so he can start getting into knife making himself. And then finally we have Josh A. Weston on Instagram, as well as at Dragon Forge Experience, which is down in Phoenix, Arizona, at the Phoenix Renaissance Festival. If you are in the area or going to be in the area, they will be there for a while. So go hit them up and check them out. I think they're going to be there until the weather starts to get a little too hot, and then they're going to call it good. And he's got to be at Blade Show anyways in June. So that is it. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I think there was a question from my friend Jedwin Nippenberg, who just did a demonstration actually and a talk in the Netherlands for a knife making like symposium get together or some sort. He had a question about Sanmai, or sorry, not Sanmai, about Hamones. I'm gonna carry it over because I'm doing Q&A right after this. Well, in a couple hours, I'm doing my Q&A, so we're gonna hit that question over there, Yerwin. And otherwise, again, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you hanging out with me through all this. For the video portion of the podcast, I'm just going to cruise through some of these pieces. But for audio, we'll say cut. But I think for the video, and maybe it gets cut, maybe it doesn't, I don't know. Video, I'm just going to kind of talk through some of these pieces. Some of these pieces I pulled pictures up of, were for me kind of I don't know what to call them. Benchmarks, not benchmarks, milestones. Yeah, maybe milestones. But these were all all blades that I was really stoked about. Let's see. So this is one. This is an experimentation with a pattern. I can't remember what I called this one. Maybe tidal wave. It's a Guido. It's a mosaic. But I started playing with this technique of book matching patterns rather than stacking tiles straight up. I would do a stack, weld it, forge it to a point where I could split it or split off a couple pieces and book match them back and back to each other so that they would match down the blade. And this was the first proof of that technique or that concept, and it worked really well. I was very happy with that. So anyways, there's that one. This next one is the Ravens Conspiracy pattern. This one's kind of hard to see, especially in the handle area, but really it's for the blade. This is another Japanese cowboy handle. The tidal wave one was as well. And again, this is playing with weaving patterns. So at a certain point when I was in Dragon's Breath Forge in Connecticut, which oh shit, I just punched the microphone. I completely forgot to mention at a point I moved to Dragon's Breath Forge where I met Jamie Lundell, Matt Parkinson, Peter Swarsbert, and developed great friendships with those guys, as well as learned a ton while out there on the East Coast. But one of the things, and I really credit working in that shop, especially the access that I had, the tools I had access to, particularly the TIG welder and the 110 SAMAC. A lot of people are always, I think they're trying to get bigger and bigger hammers all the time. But that 110 SAMAC was freaking sweet. I loved that thing. I didn't need a hammer bigger than that. It was great for forging Damascus as well as for forging blades. But anyways, it was there where I started to play more with my micro billets and having more success with my micro billets, as well as forging unique patterns and successfully getting them stuck. And again, using that TIG welder and using that 110 SAMAC really helped. And this Ravens Conspiracy was kind of part of an evolution of weaving patterns that I started to develop while I was working at Dragon's Breath Forge. The very first one, the Briar Patch pattern that I first developed, was the first weave pattern that I developed, um, that was really innovative and out there and very different. This was me trying to buck the system in a way in regards to the basket weave pattern. Basket weave is an old pattern. It's been around. Honestly, basket weave patterns have been around. They were doing basket weaves in ancient Rome almost 2,000 years ago. That is how fucking old they are. But they they have been really limited on what they look like. And unfortunately, it's it kind of looks like basket woven stuff, but I felt like it could look better. Now, I will not say that this pattern ended up being the solution, but it did end up moving me in a direction in regards to developing three-dimensional patterns, or patterns that felt like they had a lot more depth to them, and felt like the elements were really truly weaving over and under each other. And that was a big part of that development there. Um, let's see, what other ones do I have? I have, what's this one here? I can't remember. This is the Dragonfire again. This is another knife that I made. I started doing these. This is made entirely out of recycled materials. So the 15 and 20 in this blade is, was it? It's 15 and 20 from bandsaw blades, from old mills from around, from the logging industry here in Washington in the Pacific Northwest. And then the dark material is bearing steel material. Um, so I forged them out into bars, cleaned them up, reassembled them, put them together to make this Dragonfire mosaic. And this is a K-tip gyro that ended up going to Chef Ming Tsai. And then it incorporates some wood, which is difficult to see. The wood is, what is it, old growth material that came from actually the, at the Olympia Brewery. They had these faux barrels in their tasting room. There are these giant faux doors, I believe is what they're called. And they're these wooden barrels. And these ones were made as cabinets from old growth fir. And I have other projects where I made knives from old growth as well, where they, like, just in the length of the handle have, it was like a severe dry spell of growth, where they were like over 300 growth rings in the 4.5 inches of what became the handle. So anyways, it also features bronze spacers on either side of the wooden aspect. I think it has a synthetic spacer between the bolster and the handle. And then there's more synthetic handle material. So it's a combination of, and these are reclaimed micarta from, one is from the brewery, or sorry, one is from the lumber sawmill operation. So they use the micarta because it's so wear resistant for helping to shim up the logs and hold them in place or keep them from rolling away from where they're supposed to go be. They also use them as, I believe they use them as bandsaw guides at the mill, and then so the dark one is from a wood mill or lumber mill, and then there's like a canvas, or not canvas, not butterscotch, but it's like an orange kind of burgundy micarta that came from one of the UC Berkeley's facility. I think it's UC Berkeley or UC, gosh, one of the University of California schools. But it was being scrapped because one of the buildings was being remodeled or taken down, and there was all this circuit board material, and micarta was used sometimes as a foundation for motors to sit on or circuitry to connect to. And my buddy Will Brigham got a hold of these giant chunks, and so I incorporated that. So that entire knife was made from recycled material. Oh, let's see. Here's another one. This is a hunter I made. This was part of a project for a knife set that I made for Joe Rogan. And this is the first time that I ever did any kind of hunter or Bowie style handle sculpting in this style. I really credit Claude Beauchamp, who is a maker out of Belgium, whose work is really incredible and beautiful, for inspiring or influencing this handle material or this handle style. Um, I at my first blade show, he was my table mate to my left, or table neighbor, I guess, and I saw his handles, and I was like, that is the most ridiculous and stupid looking thing I've ever seen in my life. And then I think Lynn Ray actually came over and was talking to Claude and had his hands all over those knives. And it was like the last day of the show. I had not touched one of his knives once the whole time I was there. And really, that was kind of an arrogant thing for me to do. And coming from a place of like, I know better. And I had no idea, because the second I picked up the knife, I was like, it seemed like everything I thought I knew about handles went right out the fucking window. Especially when it comes to Western style handles, because it was the most comfortable handle I'd ever held in my entire life. Especially like a hunting knife handle. And so that really influenced this handle style. And then this guard was this is the first time I ever sculpted a guard in this way, using my rotary platen to sculpt the guard. And I haven't done one like this in a while, but I actually don't really know anybody that uses rotary platens for guard sculpting. And part of me wants to do some, not necessarily, probably just like a video on how I do it, but it's a unique process, and it really pushes the rotary platen to do something you probably wouldn't expect it be able to do. But it is a great way to flow in some of these lines and get some nice curvature to the shape of the guard, so it's really comfortable against the front, your index finger, the front of the grip. Okay, the next one I will say is gosh, what was this? Tanto, I believe, is what the customer called it. It was the first time I ever forged any kind of I guess Japanese style weapon. And I had never worked with silver soldering or doing any work with non-ferrous metals. And so the habaki, which is the transition from the blade into the guard, was a very foreign thing to me. But I am very confident in my ability to grind. And so I was like, you know what I'm going to do? Instead, I'm going to make an integral habaki. And so I did exactly that. And so the habaki, this blue area, steps down into the blade, and that was all ground. That's all hand ground and sculpted in there. And then that goes into the guard, which is actually typically 2 pieces. But I decided I also wanted to make that an integral piece, so that instead of having 2 separate pieces, they were 1 piece. So the spacer going into the suba are actually 1 piece instead of 2, though they appear to be 2. And then the spacer underneath is also Damascus, which goes into a hidden tang Buckeye burl handle. But this was definitely a step way outside of my comfort zone to build this thing. But I was very happy that I did build it, and that I was successful in making the project, and it's also got the handle materials museum fit to the spacer and everything. And so everything is just like really nice on there. And yeah, I'm thankful. One of the things that I'm thankful for with custom orders is just the unique challenges that are presented to you to build some things, to push you outside of your comfort zone so that you can grow as a maker. And so let's see. I got this one. This is a knife. This is the knife that was actually featured in the Vogue magazine. And this is my acanthus pattern. This is, again, a play on trying to create a weaving double helix kind of pattern. Unfortunately, it doesn't really present super well in this pattern, but it's this double helix, actually, this concept, at least, this approach, which informed the book match double helix that I did for the Ravens conspiracy. So if you look at this Ravens conspiracy again, but only try to focus on one half of it, you can see how it kind of has this double helix kind of twisting motion. But when you book match it through the center back to back, then it creates this double woven thing. It's crazy looking. That ends up looking like it's got ravens in the material. So anyways, that was a fun one. This is another one that I finished out, and I've been wanting to come back and do this again. This is, I believe this was a Sanmai, and it's a random pattern Sanmai, and I think it's just a convex grind. No, actually I think this one is actually one of my early S grinds, and I really didn't like I think what I was trying to do was disguise or hide the fact that when I did the S grind, when I was grinding the hollow, I ground into the core material, and so I was grinding through the cladding. So I darkened the whole blade up with a hot coffee etch, and then I buffed the edge back, so it had this what's called a kurochi finish on the blade. And so that means most of the blade's kind of dark with a bright edge. And this is not the greatest photo of this. A lot of these knives, I wish I had them back so I could refinish them and rephotograph them. But anyways, that was a really cool one that I would love to replicate and do again. Let's see. I think this one. This is the knife. When I went and taught Neil Kamimura, I taught him some mosaic stuff. And this is the steel. We each cut a chunk off of the billet, because we did a monster billet at that time. Cut a slab off, forged it out into bar stock, and then proceeded to beat the shit out of it and forge a knife out of it. Because Neil didn't believe that the steel could stay together. And we just beat the shit out of it, and it completely blew his mind how solid it was. And it all comes down to the approach and the technique. This is one of the first knives that I did the upset choil, and you can't really see it in the photograph very well. But this has the upset choil. This also has my hex octo handle. So it's a hexagon at the butt of the handle, but at the front of the handle, where it transitions into the blade, it's an octagon. And so this is another kind of play on trying to innovate and develop techniques and approaches that are uniquely my own, to really, again, to distinguish my work from others, by just doing things that nobody else is doing. But at a certain point, people start to do this stuff. They gain influence from work. And if you're doing good work, don't be surprised if somebody starts copying or taking influence from it. This is another knife set that I made for Joe Rogan. This was actually the first set I made for him. It was the chef's knife and hunting knife combo. And this guard on this knife was actually the very first time I used that rotary platen to sculpt the guard the way I did. And I wish I had a closer photo. You can go find it on my Instagram. It's deep in the feed, but you can get a closer look at what that guard actually looks like. Let's see. This one. Oh, let's do this one real quick. This one is a piece that where I incorporated moose antler actually as a spacer, transitioning into a spalted spalted Japanese cowboy handle. And I was so happy with how this came together, because I'd never done a spacer like that before. And this is also one of the first times I did a downward kind of raked bolster. So instead of having a bolster that was perpendicular to the tang, it's raked slightly downward from the spine to the belly, or canted, I guess, is another way to refer to it. But then I have the moose antler spacer in there. It's either moose or it's elk. I can't remember. But it came out great, and I was really happy with that. And that was one I was really kind of stressing about, but ended up working out really well. I'm just looking through all these other pictures. think this is another brute to forge. This is similar to that one that I did with Neil. And this is a knife that I actually wish I was in a position to keep. I wish I had kept that one because I really love the overall look aesthetic of it. I really love the handle flow. It has that upset heel, the back of the knife. This is the overall, I believe, overall shot of the knife. So, and this is another hexocto in a way, but it's got a slightly different play to how the facets flow into each other. It ended up being really nice and comfortable. Again, this is a knife I really wish I could have kept, but I just can't keep them all. I just have to make another one. And then I think I got one last one. I know I've gone long on podcasts. So these knives were my first production run. These were the Smith & Bard knives. These were just monosteel knives made out of 1075, which is a great high carbon steel. It's simple, it's tough. And honestly, a lot of antique knives were probably made with a similar steel. But the handle construction, not only the construction, but the sculpting style was one that was kind of like a milestone for me. This is my, and you can't really see it, unfortunately, in this photograph too well, but I have a photo here where you can kind of get a better look at the white underlayment or spacer between the tang. These were full tang knives and the wood. And these were a style of handle I was calling ridge line, because there's this line that kind of swerves and curves its way up from the handle blade to handle transition, on the spine, all the way down across and through the handle down to where the pinky rests on the handle. And I was really happy with how this came out and how it also ended up looking. There's another one. This is I think it's this green dyed Carillion burl or black ash, I can't remember, but again, it's the same thing. It's got that S kind of shaped ridge line, but the rest of the handle is all contoured and smooth. And this is a handle I really want to do more of. Really enjoyed that. And I think, oh, actually I lied, I got another one. This is my first, again, milestones. This is my first integral guard knife, I think, that I had ever finished. It's not the first one I forged, but it's the first one I finished. This is made out of W2. It's got an integral guard, which you can see better here. And cleaning up this guard and getting that all finished out I was really anxious that it was going to be more than I was capable of, but I did have the skills. I just hadn't done it yet. And this was a milestone. This was a good one for me to feel accomplished and feel more confident in my skills and abilities, making this knife. And then these are just a pair of earrings. Sometimes I make earrings on the side with leftover materials or scrap materials. So that was a fun little side project. And then I was going to finish with a picture, I think a picture of my kiddo. Him when he was like maybe 2 or 3 years old in this picture, sitting with his grandpa. This is Sarah's father. They're both wearing their Smith & Bard shirts, and this is a great one. Victor is actually, my son Victor is named after John, my father-in-law, named after his father. So John's father's name was Victor Thompson, and Victor's name is Victor Maumasi. And so it's cool to see them sitting together like that. All right. With that said, now I'm really going to call it quits for the day. And I will be back in about an hour and a half, a little under an hour and a half for our Q&A session. I'm going to be going through Paisley pattern. And if you aren't part of the Patreon, that's where it's going to live. But you can go see it, join the Patreon, and you'll be able to see that walkthrough as well as the rest of the Q&A. And with that, I bid everyone adieu. Thank you, and I will talk to you